Councillors, we'll move on to item D, which is under roading and footpaths, which is the Portobello Road Safety Improvement Acceleration Funding Options. And
just what number page?
13.
18.13.1 to 18.13.9. And welcome to the team. Would you like to kick off the thing?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report you have in front of you follows quite a bit of work that's been done in the last, I suppose, 6 to 9 months, following on from the annual plan discussion last time around the sequencing of Portobello Road. The challenge, I suppose, that was set for the team was trying to bring the construction period forward, shortening that time frame, doing the modelling around what that might mean in terms of construction costs and how we might fund that. What you have in front of you is effectively a proposal that would bring the completion of the program from Vauxhall through to Portobello forward by about 5 or 6 years. There is a funding stream in there. There's a number of options for you to consider. The main two options really are whether the council increases to a certain extent its debt funding of that additional expenditure that would need to be funded, or whether there's an option of looking at NZTA for some additional financial assistance, which would then need to be effectively reimbursed over the subsequent years. The numbers you better read there, significant savings we think in terms of the construction costs, utilising a contractor to do the whole lot in one go as opposed to potentially 8 separate contracts over 8 years gives some synergies. Giving the contractor the ability to determine the sequence and how they build that to the standard gives us the efficiency of the contract operations, and of course there is the time cost of money. If we bring forward the cost, we reduce the inflationary costs that would otherwise have been incurred in subsequent years. So I suppose the key question for you this morning is, do you want to proceed with a speed-up program, and there's a funding equation that goes with that? And if you don't want to do that, then we do need to get some guidance around the sequence and prioritisation of the remaining sections over the next 8 to 9 years.
Thanks, Tony. I'll throw it open to councillors for questions, and then we can we'll see if someone has a resolution to raise. So, questions. Councillor Pitt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just a question for Tony or Jean about just how the approaches and discussions with the NZTA have gone in terms of the idea of an accelerated program.
In general, very favourable with an accelerated program. It'll be considered through the National Land Transport Program and through the RTC. I believe that it was rated as a top priority, the accelerated project. So very favourable at this stage. And the discussions have been running in parallel around, as we've laid out in the report, the advanced funding as well.
I think what's also become evident is that the notion of achieving the benefits that would be derived from the Vauxhall to Portobello Road improvements are well accepted, bringing them forward by 5 to 6 years and saving substantial costs along the way because of the efficiencies of the procurement rings bells with most of, certainly NZTA understand. NZTA are also struggling around the country to get projects that are actually buildable and able to be using the NZTA funds. So we have a project here that we're pretty confident we can deliver and use the NZTA funds. So I think the response has been pretty positive for all those reasons.
Thank you.
Councillor Keller.
How are we going with our chance of having another bite at the NZTA cherry and the $100 million extra funds? And is it better to be having a go with them in here, or one of the other things we want them to do? Or?
So in terms of the $100 million Urban Cycleway Fund, there is potential that could contribute towards this project as well. But the way that system works is still being defined. The Minister's has signed off a report recently on that, and the group and terms of reference for that group has been established, if not now, but very soon. So that information will come out soon. But generally, the indications from NZTA is that yes, there is potential for additional funding from that source for this project. When we just simply will be working through that over the course of the National Land Transport Program development process from here on in as well.
Because it's a question to me, and you'll know much better, and I'm sure you're doing whatever the right things are, but that money didn't seem to me tagged in a safety sort of sense in the same sort of way, so it seemed to be a bit more flexible. So whether we try and hone in on it for this project or another one that they'd be less keen on doing for safety or other reasons might be.
You're correct in that this project is a safety improvements project, but if we look at the benefits and through the benefit cost analysis, there is a large proportion of benefits due to the cycling initiative, which does open it up for that broader conversation with the NZTA.
I suppose the other thing is that this is already a project that the NZTA have approved in terms of their funding overall. It's under a current program. The $100 million is also potentially available for projects which aren't on the books or aren't currently funded. So I think there's a report later on in the sequence, and we'll talk about some of those aspects around the broader cycling strategy that the council has and where that might be best spent. But part of the issue is talking with the NZTA about how we maximise the income we get from NZTA built around their rules to deliver the best outcome. This is a program which is already funded, so we have that advantage, and it is about bringing the existing funding forward and making that work.
Councillor Noon.
Question for Mr Avery with regards to your comment about the ability for the contractor to have some greater control over what pieces are done in that 3-year time frame. So I assume if that contractor wanted to do all the reclamation in one go, for example, he would be able to do that. So the synergies or the advantages or efficiencies, are those the sorts of things you're referring to that the contractor has the ability to implement? And
yeah, I might get Mike to talk in a bit more detail, but in a sort of simple conceptual sense, we know what the design of the road improvements is. We've got experience at McAndrew Bay in terms of the physical wall. The hard top will be different, obviously, in terms of the markings, but the actual physical construction of the wall, the backfill material, all of that sort of stuff is known. So the notion is that if we say to the contractor, the task is to build to complete between Vauxhall and Portobello to that design parameter, you figure out the best way of sequencing the construction. They then work out the most efficient way to do that. And under that scenario, we would deliver the improvements at Portobello and at Vauxhall faster than the current program of prioritisation. Recall last year where there was, I think Portobello was, even the Portobello bit and Broad Bay was going to be about 4 years, I think, 3 or 4 years. So under this scenario, the whole lot will be done in that time. So the idea is to give the contractor might say, look, it'd be more efficient to work from Portobello and Vauxhall ends or other things. There is a constraint around the facing material, and the contractor would then be looking at how they could do the work and perhaps come back. But Mike might be able to comment more if he's been more involved.
Thank you. The significant efficiencies for the contractor is going to come from that one project is one lot of set-up management as opposed to having several projects. So it's brought together efficiencies in organising. There's several sub-trades that come through it from we talk about the rock placing, even the asphalt that is on the top, the bulk fill, each of those, their own specific sub-trade effectively. What this does is that gives a much larger project so that there can be efficiencies of continuity and programming, planning, and to be able to bring in that with their base workload. This might become their base workload, and their other workload around the district is they can best manage that. So the contractor's got the ability to pull that together to give our best outcome for the result that we get, but it gives a financial benefit too if they can do that very, very efficiently.
thank you.
Councillor Vanders.
My understanding is that major material cost for the project or projects is rock, and the major cost of rock is its transportation. There has been talk of new quarry potential down the peninsula, talk of shortening one of the sharp corners which has a big chunk of rock behind it which could also be quarried, and talk of extending an existing quarry that's on the peninsula as well in order to be able to generate the volumes of rock that are required at a price which would be much more favourable than what we're currently looking at. Does the proposal to accelerate what we're talking about here lessen the chances of that much more cost-effective rock supply A, being developed or established, and B, perhaps having it happen at all if this happens too quickly?
Your Worship, can I just make, Your Worship? Can I just make a comment with regards to any proposal to establish a quarry on the peninsula that's in front of council? I'm prepared to sit out and plus Kate and David. If there's anything in front of council, so if Mr Harrison's going to comment about the supply of rock from a quarry not yet established on the peninsula, we need to sit out.
All right, well, it's prudent, and I take it you can sit out for the duration of that bit of questioning and then come in. That's right. Noted. Thank you.
Your Worship, the early contractor engagement process of having one contractor for the whole project is not going to limit the choices on how we would go about supplying the rock. In fact, it actually opens doors where the contractor can work with us in very much an open book situation to go through the possibilities of what sources could be brought to use. So from existing sources to potentially open new ones means that we can make a collaborative decision around what is the most economic, what is most efficient, and considering environmental aspects. So it opens those doors to those discussions, whereas the current system is very much around individual sections. There's not enough volume there to look at the options you're alluding to at this stage.
I very much appreciate that increasing the scale increases the possibility of getting a cheaper rock source. My real concern and question, though, is around timing, because any new quarry obviously will take quite a long time to set up, get consents and all the rest of it. And I'm concerned that if we accelerate this too much, we may miss an opportunity in time terms to be able to do that. Also, it's not just a possibility of a new quarry or a realignment of the road that may yield some rock, but there is at least one existing quarry out on the peninsula which could be scaled up to supply a considerable amount of rock as well. But again, that would take time. So my question is, I appreciate what you've just said, that doing it all together will certainly improve the chances of economies of scale, because it's going to be larger amounts that are involved. But is the timing of it, is the acceleration of that, having it all happening earlier, is that going to lessen the chances of actually getting something which I think we need anyway on the peninsula, and that is a more cost-effective supply of roading material?
I think quite possibly it might. It's going to be a difficult one in terms of it'll depend on the existing nature of any quarries and consents they have, as we know. We would anticipate, I suppose it would come down to the contractor under this scenario to determine their rock source and what they could actually access and the timing around that. Given the time frame that we'd be proposing in terms of this program, that may limit their options to, say, open a new quarry on the peninsula, gain consents, those sorts of things. I think that potentially is a reality. Conversely, if there are existing quarries out there, the contractor might be able to do a deal with the existing quarry owners. I suppose in terms of the way that we would set this up, that's something that the contractor would need to work through, because there's a commercial risk around that. But if you go with the time frame of I think it's a 2 or 3 year delivery, the ability to open up new quarries might be restricted, to be frank about that.
Right, yeah, that was my concern. Thank you very much for your full answer on that. My last question is, given that a 2 to 3 year accelerated program would be too soon to open up any new quarries, and given that the rock out of Saddle Hill is probably the cheapest source for rock currently, even though it is a long way to drag it, is it likely that Saddle Hill would be the source or a major source for rock for this accelerated program?
Is it likely to be one of the sources? We certainly couldn't say that it wouldn't be, because it would have to be part of the contractor's choice. So long as it's an active quarry and it's on the market, then that would be part of the supply options that the contractor could bring to the table. We're not in a position where we could... Saddle Hill could be one of the ones in there. It hasn't been to date, but all quarries that are active would be viable options.
Thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Also a question about rock, but not the conversation we've just had. You'll recall that at the last time this matter was discussed, Council moved a request for you to have some discussion with Heritage New Zealand about their preferred option. Has there been any accommodation been able to be met with that body about reuse of the existing? Has that conversation happened?
Your Worship, yes, that conversation has happened, and that there's a good relationship with Heritage New Zealand whereby where it is possible and it fits within the consent conditions, that's progress to beneficial to both parties. It's a very good discussion that's open now, and it carries on to the future about how we do it.
So you're saying that they might agree, or they have agreed to the reuse of the existing Heritage Rock Wall?
The Heritage Rock Wall, they have agreed to going through to visiting the sites with us and looking at each individual spots and to be saying, yes we can, no we can't, or yes we might do.
Sounds good, thank you very much.
And that's the best we could hope for at this stage.
Thank you.
Right. Are there any further questions? Councillor McTash.
Thank you, Bishop. My question relates to the difference in the financial options, so option 1 and option 2. I'm curious about the joint accelerated funding model. Does that have the effect of bringing forward our debt repayment period by 3 years? I.e., if we defer the funding, as in the NZTA 3-year advance funding model, I'm assuming that we're not paying interest for them because they don't have interest because they're cash. But then when we borrow to pay them back, the 20-year repayment date starts at the point that we start borrowing. And so, in effect, we will be paying debt off for 3 years longer under option 1 than under option 2.
That's correct. Yep. So in option 1, we start debt in the year 2018 and 19.
Yeah.
Whereas in option 2, we start in 2016-17. We have to get more debt.
And so at the tail, but the term of both loans is 20 years. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Right. Councillor Thompson, I understand you...
I'm going to go curry in my mouth.
Sorry, standing orders don't take account of cherries. But I understand you had a...
I have passed a motion on and through the city.
Did you?
one, Jeremy.
Amazing how fast they work.
He shifts uncomfortably in his seat. I have. Do you wish me to speak to it?
Right. Is there a seconder for that? Second to Councillor Calvert. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Thompson?
Well, look, I think we'd have a great deal of difficulty explaining to our public why we wouldn't want to take up an option that over the long term was going to save us money and speed up the safety issues and the recreational advantages of this particular program. So I think from that perspective, it seems to me an obvious decision. I think that clearly we would want option one to be the one that proceeded. We're not in a position to state that at this point in time. The indications are that there is a favourable consideration happening, but I think we've got to put something in our draft annual plan financials, and that should be the more conservative situation with an obvious note and explanation that by the time we get to the actual adoption of the LTP, we might hope to be in a position to reflect an actual decision, and so that's why I'm suggesting. I had that originally and crossed it out because I thought it was obvious.
It might be good.
I am at the minute, then I took them out as well, so I'll get Ken to put them back in.
Just because that suggests we're not choosing that.
Well, right. Have you done, Councillor Thompson? Yes. Right. Councillor Calvert, would you like to speak to this? Since you're the second. Just drop your mic a little bit.
I fully agree with Councillor Thompson on this and sometimes other things. With the last bit, only it's going back in to make it clear that it's not because we're choosing option two, it's because it's the financially prudent way to present it to the public and keep proper faith, but to me it's an absolute no-brainer, and it would be good to hear from the people, and I'm optimistic that the people will think so too. And looking forward to hearing the submissions on it.
Councillor Wilson.
I am going to support this, and I'd like to give a special mention to Richard again for coming up with this work that's gone in behind it, and to the staff for doing all the work that, and which has been substantial to get to the point we're at now. I'm really excited by it. I am hoping that the community realise that there will be still a discussion as to which order it will be done in, but really that's going to be an operational matter that we're not going to have submissions on, and honestly it will come down to the efficiency for the workers and a whole lot of other factors, and I hope we don't have that debate again. But I think this is really good input from staff and with the NZTA's assistance along the way, and I really hope that the contractors understand and give us the best opportunities to grow this. I would like to also point that this is one project that when we talk, and I'm going to refer back to yesterday's discussion on financials and our strategy, where if we don't list this as something that is not only an asset but provides a huge benefit in many ways to the city, that I think that we are still going to be focusing only on debt. And we're even calling this accelerated funding model because around this table we always talk about finance when we're doing annual plans, but I do want us to start looking at how we grow the city in quite other ways that are much greater than just looking at the bottom line financials, and I'm really excited by what this project will bring.
Thank you, Councillor Staines.
Again, it's already been said, I think this is a no-brainer, and I think we all understand that the primary reason for doing this is around safety. However, the peninsula and the low road along the peninsula has been recognised as one of the great cycles in the world, and I think by bringing this forward we enhance our offering as a city in terms of cycling tourism. The safety issues that we currently have in being able to cycle the peninsula will be significantly reduced, and we will be able to incorporate that ride in our offering as a city to attract tourists to the city and to the peninsula. So I think we have an economic benefit as well as a safety benefit from making this decision. and I think it's the right one to do.
Thank you. Councillor Peet.
Yeah, I would like to also thank the staff for bringing this report and for all the work that's going on to make this accelerated program happen. I think and to Councillor Thompson for, I think, initiating, putting us on this pathway, and also to the Otago Peninsula Community Board Chair, Chris Gary, who's with us today, for actually making, I think, one of the earliest suggestions that we could accelerate this and save money. Accelerate this program. The benefits from it are extraordinary, and they've been mentioned by one or two already in terms of recreation, in terms of safety, first of all, but in terms of recreation, cycling, walking and so on, for tourism and for just simple efficiency on the road as well. I see it as a Peninsula resident too as avoiding a very lengthy, tedious amount of disruption on the road. If it was going to happen for 8 or 10 years from now, I mean, that would be a long time to put visitors and to put the residents through disruptions during the construction phase. So that will be another benefit. Of course, saving by having this able to utilise funds at the higher FAR rate does makes very much a common sense. Like in some stage in the future when the council has some headroom financially to look at offsetting the impacts and the encroachment on the intertidal ecosystems as a result of the widening of the road. And that, you know, is a matter that kind of gets parked. And it is a big question. It can be resolved, I think, by the creation of artificial reefs. But that is also another big project, and that'll be maybe for the long-term plan way in the future. But nonetheless, for the moment, we are talking about a project that is going to be huge for the city in many ways.
Councillor Noon.
Thank you, Worship. As we move forward in time, it's often worth looking back and reflecting why this particular project, and when I say this particular project, I'm talking about the 10-year plan or the longer plan that was first implemented by council probably in about the mid-2000s or there or thereabouts. And I've heard councillors talk about reasons why this road has had a focus by the council. It's particularly been around safety, but also it's worth mentioning that the age of the seawalls has also meant that this has been a high priority for council to deal with over time, and clearly the implementation or the introduction of pedestrian and cycling facilities has also been a key aspect to it. But reflecting back to those days, mid-2000s, there was huge growth in tourist numbers. And particularly, I think every tourist that comes to Dunedin, about 2/3 of them go out on the Otago Peninsula. And I just think that it's just important to remember why we actually looked at this particular project right at the start. It was also about linking the communities on the peninsula as well to make sure that they had safe, efficient roading systems between the towns, because that was also important.
Thank you. Councillor McTaggart.
I'm happy to support this motion, but I feel that I would have to be significantly convinced of option one at a point that it was presented as the preferable option. And the reason for that is because I don't support further extending the debt repayment requirements for this project a further 3 years into the future. So I'm really supportive of option two. I'm pleased that we'll be putting that in the plan, but I'm signalling that the reasons for changing that option to option one would have to be compelling for me to change that view. The chair of the community board yesterday came in and talked about detail and her, I guess, excitement that we were now talking about detail. And I think putting this in the plan, this paper is primarily about financials, and it's fantastic that Councillor Thompson's suggestion has enabled us to move to this model. I do, however, want to emphasise that this is the beginning of a really hard piece of work. The detail is absolutely critical in ensuring that this project is done right. The Otago Peninsula is a really, it's a beautiful environment. It is, as I think the former chair of the community board often reminded us, the jewel in Dunedin's crown. And this is a significant infrastructure work that will change the shape of that environment and the user experience in that environment. And we need to ensure that every detail is considered in ensuring that that is done in the most appropriate way. So I hope that we will all be focusing our energy on ensuring that that detail is appropriate and correct, and that we don't defer to the greatest extent that we can avoid deferring resolution of encroachment and environmental degradation. I think that we need to be taking responsibility for ensuring that is the case, and that we resolve that at the time that we create that damage. So that will be my focus as we move into this project, and hopefully that will be the focus for all of us.
Councillor Vanders.
I'm glad that there seems to be a unanimous view that this is a project we all want to happen, and the sooner the better. And I concur with that. I can see value in this. And it's not often I see that much value in a lot of the things we do. However, the idea that it's somehow a no-brainer and that it's simple to do this quite massive roading extension all the way out the peninsula, and especially that the cost implications are a no-brainer or simple, I think is something that needs to be questioned and looked at closer. The costs, if you just consider the current supply of material, and let's face it, the supply of material is the major component of the cost. It can look reasonably simple at the moment, but if you look at the potential for developing a new supply of material out on the peninsula, it may be that the 3-year implementation plan is just a little bit too tight. And that if we are to say it's going to happen within 3 years, it may exclude something that could halve your rock costs if you had, say, perhaps 4. So I would be very keen to support this motion from Councillor Thompson. If there was any wriggle room to allow staff to strategically negotiate with potential contractors to actually do this in a way that hasn't been done in the past, where they would see the mutual benefit in actually developing a new source or an expanded source of local material for the project. My only concern really is that if we approve a 3-year implementation plan, that's going to be it, and that may limit staff in terms of what they're able to do. And I'm wondering if Councillor Thompson might consider softening somehow the time, so that if there was a real advantage to be gained by staff sourcing other material by pushing the timescale out a bit, whether or not we could have some flexibility there. Perhaps staff may think that there's some flexibility already inherent in this motion. I hope there is, but that would really be my concern. I'm going to vote for it anyway. I think it's good, but I don't think it's clear that we can get the absolute best value in a situation where we don't yet know where most of the material is coming from.
Can I suggest, Councillor Vanders, that to pick up on your points, the most constructive way to deal with that might be for you to move something subsequent to this, which deals with that issue. For instance, seeking some report back on ways that council might facilitate acceleration of development. I don't know what it is.
Could perhaps just the initiative that the council improves the aim of a 3-year implementation would soften the timescale?
Actually, directly addressing that, I'm suggesting that rather than change this, see if you can come up with something that you can put to the meeting immediately after this. In addition, I think that would be. That's just a suggestion, but.
Right. I can see the point of that as well, but if we could save ourselves some time, if Councillor Thompson was happy to just insert that council approves the aim of a 3-year implementation.
Well, he's indicated
it wouldn't be hard.
He's indicated he's not keen.
I think that we have to put something definite in the LTP, and I think we have to give a clear indication to the public. I think that if staff were to come back here next month and say, we've just discovered that if we did it over 4 years instead of 3, we'd halve the cost, well, then we'd have another discussion.
So that being the case, I'm happy to leave it.
But can I urge you to consider putting something to the meeting that might give the council the direction to find ways of facilitating accelerated development of those rock sources, for instance.
Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Like many before me, I'll be supporting this. I think it really is a great initiative in the sense of maximising the spend with the NZTA co-investment. I think the community safety aspect is really the big one for me, is looking at ensuring its safety for the residents of the peninsula, driving and reducing vehicle accidents. But also the other side of it is, I think, as Councillor Stain said, it's the tourism aspect, but also I think it's going to be a great community asset. And I think, we spend a lot of money on the local cycle network here, especially around South Dunedin. I think when this is finished out the peninsula, I think we'll really see the whole cycle network come together. And anybody, we just have to look at Ravensbourne and to Maya Cycleway and see the benefits it already has and the usage it gets. As someone who's just got back to riding a bike after many years, I'm looking forward to using it in 3 to 4 years' time.
Great. Councillor Bazet.
Well, like all other councils, I think this is it's very easy to support. No question about that, and I also congratulate the staff for the amount of work they've done. I have just one reservation, and I assume that in doing the financials on the safety improvements, that and I'm hoping that Council Laws, in accepting this or moving this resolution, will take into consideration the issue that I'm wishing to address, which is that the staff will decide the way these improvements are done. So we don't get into a debate at annual plan time of different communities down the peninsula saying, hey, well, it's great, we're going to have this 3 years, now we want ours done first. So I really want confirmation from the staff that they've looked at that issue, and that they will come back with a recommended program for the improvement upgrades, and that will follow 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever, so that we don't get these competing communities as to who's going to go first, second or third. So have some feedback from that.
Through you, Your Worship. The proposal is that the contractor is able to determine the sequence, so there won't be an opportunity for communities out there to, I suppose, influence the prioritisation of that. That's on the notion that we would then deliver the entire project within the current timeframes anyway. So if you recall, last year, I think, by memory, the Broad Bay to Portobello was going to take about 4 years, I think. And it was sequencing and then potentially Vauxhall after that. So under this scenario, everyone gets the benefits sooner, collectively, than we had planned. The only issue, though, is that there would be engagements, I think, with communities along the way about some of the finer detail around steps down and access ways and other localised things, because that's quite important to make sure that the fine detail of that sort of stuff is worked through. We'll be working with the community board and the communities about that. But the intent is that the contractor determines the sequence, and that's quite important because that gives us the best advantage to make use of the contractor efficiency. They may come along and go, we want to start from the middle and work out. We might want to start at the Portobello end or the Vauxhall end, and that's an important part of the proposal that needs to be understood.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I'm delighted to hear that because with the contractors deciding the sequence, it should be made quite clear to our residents that that is what we are agreeing to, because that takes the emotive and political debate out of the development right from the start, and I think that's really important.
I think the key message that the community will understand instantly is that the entire peninsula community gets the benefits 5 or 6 years earlier than they would otherwise have.
That's great, thank you.
Right, any further speakers? Well, before I come back to Councillor Thompson, I very much support this resolution as well. And I just observe that although the extension program on Portobello Road was kicked off for safety reasons, it actually has an enormous a number of benefits that have been articulated around the table in addition to safety. And I note that interestingly, and I live on the road, I note that the development of pedestrian ways and cycleways very much links communities, whereas particularly pedestrian ways, whereas roads separate them. And they link people as well in ways that roads can't. So this is a huge boon to not just the peninsula communities, but to the whole of the city in that regard. It's also an example, I think, of the diversity of our developing cycle network. I note that there are all sorts of different types of cycleways that we're developing. The mountain bike clubs are developing wonderful rides in Wakari and Signal Hill and places like that. We've got the ones that are purely for safety, then we've got the ones for commuters. Computers can use them as well if they like, I suppose. And then we've got this one that will cater for both recreational cyclists, commuters, tourists. It is a huge range of users. In some ways, the fact that there's been some gaps in time between the initial development of the extensions and now although it's been tedious, has been a bit of an advantage because we've been able to learn from our experience of how the current bits have been used, and we've already decided that the layout across the road will differ from the way we put it in the first place. I think there's probably some more learnings that we can do about how we lay it out and just how much we need to extend to get what we need without encroaching, as Councillor Peters warned, any more than we absolutely have to into the tidal zone in the harbour. And I'd just finally go back to the point that Mr Avery made, that regardless of the fact that inevitably some of the areas and some of the communities in the peninsula will get their extension a little earlier than others, the fact is that the whole peninsula community will get this extension earlier than they would have been under any other scheme. So they're all better off. So, Councillor Thompson, your
I don't think anything that needs to be.
Right. Thank you. Well, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Candidas.
Is it a consequential motion? Yeah. What I'm suggesting is that Council acknowledges the large amount of quarry material that will be required for the accelerated Portobello Road safety improvements, and proposes that staff work with potential contractors to also accelerate provision of local rock supplies to lessen the project cost. Sorry, it's a bit wordy. I'm not quite sure how else to put it.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Calvert? Seconding it? Yeah.
Worship, the consent team will sit out of this.
It's fine. Yes, I think that's wise because some of these ways might be by accelerating consents or facilitating consents. And so, Councillor
Question.
Do you want to speak to it any more before you...
No, I think I already had a fair crack, thank you.
Righto. Councillor Bazin.
Well, question, wouldn't staff do this anyway? Do you need a resolution? I mean, if you want one, that's fine, but I would expect in a job like this, it's being accelerated, that staff would ensure that there was material available to do the job. It's like...
Yes, that's correct. We will be doing exactly that. The proposed approach is early contractor engagement, which works through the options in terms of sources and takes into consideration we'll all be driving for the lowest cost project. So we will be working interactively with a number of contractors to a point where we have a preferred contractor, which those type of discussions would continue on as well.
Could I just add that when I'm talking about staff here, I'm not just talking about transport staff, I'm talking about consent staff, I'm talking about other staff who may not normally be involved in the process, who may be required to, for instance, facilitate opening a new quarry. And it's basically just a signal from council that we would be happy with them to accelerate that usual process.
Further speakers? Councillor White.
Yeah, I'll be supporting this. I think at the annual plan last year in May, we were talking about this, and Councillor Hall and I went out there and had a look, and we worked it out, I think, during the annual plan process. It was 23,000 truck movements was going to be required for the fill. And I think, you know, just thinking of how many 23,000 truck movements through the city, you know, when there is potential to use local material is a simple no-brainer.
Further speakers? Well, I will be supporting this motion. I think that it is an example of looking ahead and seeing what some of the not only risks are, but some of the opportunities are. And I think that it might well be an instance where we can use the red tape policy to facilitate something that might have taken a bit longer by other means, but benefits everybody. So I'll be supporting this motion as well. Councillor Van Der Bust, do you wish to exercise your right of right? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Council. Now, on to strategic cycle network update and funding possibilities. That is 18.14.1 to 18.14.25. Okay, councillors, we're on to, as I say, strategic cycle network update and funding possibilities. I'll, as usual, kick off with questions. Councillor Thompson.
My questions are they're slightly driven by ignorance, and so be patient with me. One of the concerns that I have is that we're developing a network in blocks, and that we're being asked in this report, I guess, to what extent we want to put extra money in to fill in the gaps in the blocks. And we're doing that in a public environment which, as you've recognised in the report, there is considerably polarised views. And so one of the questions that's going through my mind is there a need to rethink some of the order given what we know now in terms of both cost and the polarised views? And I need to just explain what I mean by that to ask the question. It seems to me that there's two potential groups of beneficiaries, if you like it. In the local level, there's the likes of school kids and things like that, making it safe to get from home to school, that kind of thing. And then there's a commuter network. And most of the focus seems to be around the commuter network and the main routes. And to the extent that there is to be public buy-in for what we're doing, and as people know, I support this, we need to be able to demonstrate that we're growing usage as a result of what we do. But to the extent that safety affects that, and you have significant safety issues in elements of, if you like, the arterial routes, then unless you address those, you're not necessarily going to grow use on those, because it's always going to be affected by the weakest or the least safe point. So my question then is, are you confident that the order of priority is still as it was envisaged when the project started, or might there be a need to rethink that order of priority so that you focus more on removing the safety constraints on the arterial routes, so you will get growth that then provides, if you like, some of the justification for continuing some of the other ones in the future? I'm sorry, it's a long-winded question, but I couldn't ask it without an explanation.
So, I suppose from our perspective, just to go back a wee bit, this report's very much around the levels of funding, not so much the sequence and order of way you may implement and roll out that strategic cycle network. Whilst we haven't done a specific piece of work that has reflected on the strategic cycle network and its rollout plan, we have not had any thoughts or concerns raised that whether that order is strategically correct or incorrect. That it still makes sense, to my understanding at this stage, as to what order we would roll it out. If I understand your question correctly, it's about the sequence and whether that's still valid.
Well, yeah, okay, well, we can debate that, but so yes, if the perception from other than the brave is that commuter cycling is too dangerous because of what is happening in the central city or whatever, then they're not going to use the safe parts that are created on the outskirts, because they still can't get to where they want to get to. So I guess that's really, you're asking us to either maintain funding or increase funding, and I think it's reasonable in that circumstance to say, well, if we increase funding, should it not also be contingent that a review around whether what we're doing is still the optimum approach should also be done?
I think that's a fair contingency, or a fair request, that we do review where we've got to so far and assess whether the strategy or the implementation strategy is still appropriate.
Councillor Kelly.
Sort of following on from Councillor Thompson's questions, I asked earlier, and it may be in my email now today, the number of people who are commuting by cycle seems to have gone down. Could you answer me how much, what that I don't know who ended up with the question, but I asked a question saying, it looks to me in the...
The answer was emailed out.
Was it? So if you could just answer that, because I haven't...
We don't recall that question being asked. About...
As I recall, you asked about why it had gone from 2% to 1%.
No, I asked what it had gone from.
Census data?
It came from the resident opinion survey or something, and it just looked to me like it had gone down, which would fit in with Councillor Thompson's observation that maybe it's because people were unsafe.
I may have got the question wrong, but I thought that I saw that question come through, and it went from 2% to 1%, but the comment was that that was within the margin for error in any case. So they weren't sure whether it was a decrease or an increase. That was one of the questions.
Next step.
A census-related question in the city profile, so it probably didn't go to you guys, it probably went to Jane and team.
But whilst they're looking at it broadly, based on counters and evidence that we've witnessed, is that cyclist numbers is on the increase, particularly when we had done some surveys recently on Portsmouth Road and Victoria Road. And on that specific question.
Yes. Yeah, I just couldn't tell because it was so swapped back. Yeah. Could we have, if you're in support of a report concerning order of order of the proposed cycleways, something telling us what we thought the pieces we've done so far would cost and what they actually cost, and including the likely cost of corrections, if I can put it that way, for the Portobello Road connection bit. What's it called? The bit that we've been discussing with the...
Yes, it correct as Portobello Road. It does confuse it with the other one, but it is, so we ought to understand it's the Andy Bay section.
Right. So would it be possible to have something saying this is what we thought they would cost and this is what they're actually costing and this is what that piece would cost, to give us an idea whether we're now being better at costing, so as we can see how far, firstly which order we might want to do things in, and secondly how far any money might go before we try and commit to. Is that
It's possible. We are constantly reviewing the costs of the cycleways as they've been rolled out, and are aware that some of the initial estimates have been and have varied compared to the cost of actual for a number of reasons. And as an example, the Quiet Street costs are greater due to the greater than expected cost for build-outs. For example, it's not as simple as just painting lines on the road as such. So that's an area. But so we are constantly reviewing and learning on that in the process, and as a result, we are updating our budgets and forecasts. And by way of example, with the revised Network Option 2 that was passed last year, around July, I recall, that was a reflection of greater knowledge and changes and correct changes to design which influenced the cost. But yes, in terms of looking forward, so we draw on all that experience, and that would be a big consideration in terms of how we might deliver and how we could progressively roll it out.
And could we have in our public consultation documents something about parking and the actual costs there, because to have benefits and proposed costs for cycle networks without a cost of not having parking income seems to me incomplete. Is it possible to have, you've answered a question for me saying that you think that if we lost parking on a one-way street, it may be in a realm of a couple of figures, and you've also suggested that we may be able to make that up by encouraging people to park in parking buildings and get more money and things. But if we're consulting with the public and we know that that's the other side of consulting about cycling, is it appropriate? Can you put in the cost of doing that? And if the proposal that we're wanting to consult on includes the likes of, I wanted to park by the museum, but you've given me now a paid park somewhere else that you think I might use, people are going to want to have input into that, I think, and I think we should have out there, if that's the proposal.
So in terms of parking loss, specifically in relation to revenue, it is only the State Highway 1 project where that is affected. In some other parts of the South Dunedin project there has been parking losses or implications, but generally that hasn't resulted in a revenue loss as such because they tend to be unrestricted parks. In turn, back to the State Highway 1 project, parking was explicitly included in part of the consultation that's been carried out and indicated what the rough order parking loss might be, but from memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff, that didn't address specifically the preferred mitigation options, but that would still to be worked through in the detailed design.
Yes, but that doesn't put it in the actual, that's money we might have to find, so it's got a budgetary implication.
In terms of State Highway 1 parking mitigation, just to give you a bit of a brief on that, so in this report here we have highlighted and draw your attention to the third recommendation, I think it is, that at the moment there is no budget set aside for parking mitigation. However, NZTA, particularly the funding arm of it, what we call the P&I arm of NZTA, doesn't have a firm view on where those costs would lie at this stage. Now the HNO, which is the project side of it, might have a slightly different view on that they would probably prefer that we put some resource aside to fund that side, but the funding arm wants to have more discussion around where those costs could lie, and it's very clear at this stage they're not fixed on that, and that would become clearer over time through the detailed design and budgeting process.
It may be that this belongs, the question, I might be better to ask it again in the city parking area, but there's no way NZTA, it seems to me, is likely to recompense us for $200,000 or $300,000 worth of parking revenue loss, whatever happens. I mean, we might build a building or we might do something else, but there's no way that this is the operational budget year on year, which should appear somewhere that that's money we have to find that we don't have at the moment. And I'm just wondering whether it belongs in the cycling area or whether it belongs in the parking area, but we should flag it to the public as money we have to find somewhere else that we're on.
Yeah, that's correct. It is an operational decision. It's they are, my understanding, wouldn't be providing any changes in revenue as a result, but through the project and our involvement in that project, there would be consideration of the parking in those areas and how they would be mitigated, and there would be potential changes to that, which could increase the revenue and reduce that shortfall. But that's still a lot of detail to be worked through to determine how, if there is a shortfall and how that might be funded, and that becomes a council decision.
Can we have that in this considerations? Because if it could be a year by year cost to us, we should be consulting with the public on it.
And that would happen through, I suppose, through the budgeting process, but we are not at the point to be able to have that conversation yet because the details aren't known, and that would be worked out through the detailed design process.
also note that you've previously made a decision to establish a working party that will work with NZTA, and the working party includes councillors, that will need to look at the implications of the proposal, and will also need to consider the long-term plan implications of lost revenue from parking offset by any increase in revenue, other parking buildings and other things. So that's already built into the process that needs to be worked through. We don't have a definition right now about what we might and might not include in the current version of the long-term plan. We can't give you any more definition on that at the moment.
But we can flag up to the public that these are issues that over the next 10 years during the life of this long-term plan, we've got parking losses that we have to find a way of doing something with.
Look, I think the answer that I keep hearing is we don't know, A, if we have parking losses, and B, more importantly, we just can't quantify them at the moment. So it seems to me that what we're hearing is we can't put a figure in. I mean, you make a very good point, but it's not. We haven't arrived at the point where we can say this is what the figure is.
Well,
so we can't put it into the plan. So that's what I'm hearing.
Right, and to Your Worship, that will be a decision that the council need to make at some subsequent point as we come back with the implementation strategy for both the State Highway 1 cycleway pier, and there's a process. You've already agreed on a process to work with the NZTA around that. We're doing some work around trying to mitigate the loss of parking, and there's a fuller report that will come back in due course about how that will be dealt with. So there's already processes in place. We just don't have the answer yet, and it will become a political decision at the end of the day.
Maybe it belongs in the part of the document that involves risk. You know, risk of it costing us money to lose parking revenue, risk moderate, risk high, risk whatever. Maybe it belongs in that part of the document where we have risks that we don't yet know about, but we want to flag up to the public. Is that somewhere where?
Well, I don't know, the Chief could perhaps advise, but I think there'll be some, given the new requirements around consultation, we need to be reasonably specific, and I don't think we can be vague and say, well, there might be a risk where we don't know there might be. I don't know.
Well, we've got oil volatility as a risk, so I don't see why we can't have lots of parking as a risk. It's just equally risky.
I mean, the loss of parking that occurs and the potential to move that parking to other locations entirely depends on where you build your cycleways. The width of the road sometimes means you can keep parking, sometimes you can't. So it seems to me that before you build any new cycleways, that kind of consultation should take place. It's difficult, and we do that, it's difficult to prejudge a fiscal impact of that. On the other hand, if you put a budget in that said you want to put X amount of money per annum into the annual plan for the continuation of the strategic cycle network, as is currently in the budget, you could say, you could, for example, pass a motion to say this DCC expenditure should also cover any fiscal loss of parking revenue or creation of alternative parking options. That would be an option open to you.
I'll flag that then.
Councillor Noon.
Thank you, Worship. My question is probably for Kylie or Sarah, and it's to do with the model communities concept that was set up a number of years ago in Hastings and New Plymouth. And I just wondered, at any point as we work our way through developing a wider cycle network, whether we'd have an opportunity to promote ourselves for one of those type model communities, and would there be some greater financial benefit by way of an NZTA subsidy if we were to achieve that model community status? Does that make sense? Because I think that NZTA would like to see other communities develop in that similar way, but I imagine there is criteria that you would have to prove that you met first.
The NZTA have somewhat moved away from the model communities approach. So they had those first two model communities
seems to be superseded by the Urban Cycleway Fund, which is explained in the report, which is the $100 million investment in cycling over the next 4 years in urban centres like Dunedin. So although if we wanted to, we could pitch ourselves as a model community for cycling, there wouldn't be any benefit from an NZTA perspective really of doing that. But what they are keen to see is an integrated package where you do look at providing infrastructure, but also doing marketing, promotion and so on of that infrastructure. So you cycle skills training and the like, so that it is a kind of package approach, and that is what we're doing for the South Dunedin Cycle Network and intend to do for the other pieces.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very supportive of developments in this area, and I guess it's not only the increased use that we've seen on Portobello Road on the harbour that led to the previous discussion that shows how welcome these developments are in the community, but I've also observed them along Portsmouth Drive and Shore Street in particular. And I think they're part of a social change that's happening, which is why we need to get the linkages in place and connected and so on. But as the previous speaker mentioned buy-in, and I think that's a really critical element of community support for these initiatives. And I'm only too aware, as we all are, of the startling failure of the small section of Portobello Road between Andy Bay Road and Portsmouth Drive. And I'm yet to be confident that whatever's proposed for that is going to be satisfactory and acceptable. But I wanted to ask about a further related item in the table in 18, 14, 17. The first item, in fact, namely the complete resurfacing of the Portsmouth Drive cycleway. And when I talk about buy-in, I watch the work being done, and to read now that the work has failed and needs to be resurfaced, I'm flabbergasting. If I've misunderstood something, please correct me. But what I see here is a resurfacing of an area that within the last year was done, widened, and has failed. And I want to know why, what the problem was and how that could be. Was the specification not satisfactory? Did the contractor fail? Was it both of those? Was it not properly monitored, or have I got the wrong end of the stick?
I wouldn't put it so bluntly, but it hasn't failed. Essentially, the project did not include a resurface of the width of the new cycleway there, or the widened cycleway. It only included patching, etc., where there was a change to the width and design of the path. So there's always an intention that sometime in the future that would enhance the smoothness of the service by coming back and resealing over the old stuff and the new stuff to provide a better level of service for the cyclist along that important route.
Well, I mean, I won't dwell on it, but it seems to me that, would you agree that the negative effects of the failure that I referred to in Portobello Road, yet to be corrected, and the public concern about what's going on out there will be further highlighted when the people who drive along Portsmouth Drive every day see more work being done on the cycleway that they thought had just been done. I mean, I just think we are shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of these developments if we're constantly revisiting work that people quite properly assumed had finished. And is that not the case?
Perhaps I can give a perspective. We're not revisiting work as Jean's identified. The budget for that particular bit of work was to widen the Portsmouth Drive lane, and there's a sealed bit that runs down the length of it, and there's also the movement of the light poles that would then have to be repatched. As one who occasionally bikes down there, it is quite rough in terms of the old path and where the new path is, but it hasn't failed. It was, we didn't fund the complete replacement and sealing of the entire width at the time. And there was some question around whether that was the best use of scarce funds. Now we're saying that it's been well used now. It is a rough. Both the old path is actually quite rough. The new path, there's a join down the middle of it. There's patches where the light poles have come out. There's an opportunity to smooth that out and make it a better surface. It's not really doing work. You look sceptical, but that's the fact.
Can I add to this, that this is one thing that jumped out at me. I think that this is a well-intentioned suggestion by the staff to improve the level of service. It hasn't failed and it doesn't need resurfacing in my view. It's perfectly okay the way it is. It could be 100%, so it's 95. I think it's one of the things we don't probably need to put money into. It's not failable. Fine to bike on. I bike on it just about every day. Do you have any other questions?
Well, if that's the case, Mr. Chairman, why is there a suggestion that we spend $100,000 on it? I mean, that's the issue. That's my real issue. We've been throwing money at Portsmouth Drive and the other bit, unsuccessfully. We're going to throw more money at it. So it's not surprising that there are people in the community who don't think the best job is being done.
I just want to make clear that I'm not in any way criticising the suggestion that we do it. It would improve it. All I'm saying is that I think it's probably acceptable the way it is.
So if I can just give some context to that question. So in terms of that, where you're reading that proposed or potential further works, was in the context that the Transport Agency asked us to provide an indication of projects that could be considered for urban cycleway funding. So we put forward a list of stuff that might have been given extra funding support to help them deliver their $10 million, and that was just a possible project that was put forward. So in the intervening time, with what has happened through those conversations, that particular project has dropped off the priority list. So, and whether it will be done in the near future is still to be determined.
And does that apply to the whole list on 18, 14, 17 and following?
Yes, so that was a proposal or submission that was put forward to them to say this is what we could potentially do to start for them to get a better understanding of what our overall program is and where we are at.
Councillor Bizet.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I found this paper really quite confusing, and for the purpose of our long-term plan, we've got to come up with some sensible resolution. But when I look at the government's announced $100 million for new funding to be made for the acceleration of cycleway projects in urban areas, that hasn't been taken into consideration in our funding. It's just a possibility that we may be able to dip into that fund. So that's not in these figures at all. So that's, but from the wording in the report, it looks like that it's a real possibility that we'll be able to secure some funding through that source. Would that be a fair assumption?
That's a very fair assessment. There is ability to access additional funding. And I suppose if I can just recap the essence of the report is that, and just give a bit of background. So historically, and what is in the current pre-draft that you have in front of you is that we've got $1 million worth of expenditure budgeted, which because of the FAR rate has a increasing amount of local share of approximately $10,000 a year at the moment. Now we've also got this unique opportunity whereby the Urban Cycleway Fund will be available to access if we can provide the evidence of our program, etc. at NZTA over the next 4 years, where we can tap into that, which would, I suppose, unlock more of our local share and provide a better, in effect, a much lower subsidy rate.
Yeah,
higher subsidy rate from NZTA.
Right, and if we don't look to support or increase our fund, then the NZTA are not going to look favourably on us in any approach we make to them. I mean, once again, it should be noted that reducing the council's local share is unlikely to be supported by NZTA, as the purpose of the urban cycleway is to accelerate their delivery. So if we say no further funding, then they are not likely to take that too kindly. So I understand that. But once again, just getting back to the issue that I mentioned before about to move this forward, I mean, the complexity, I mean, Councillor Benson perhaps talking about Portobello Road, which is fair enough, that's one part of it. Councillor Calvert's talking about parking down the State Highway, and that's another part, and they're completely different issues, but they're related to this particular topic. If we're looking at your recommendations, recommendation 1, that's fine, recommendation 3, that's fine, that's just to be noted. But recommendation 2 is the one where you want some decision on funding. Now, do we have to make that decision at this time? Can that not be left as it is?
it could be that's the choice for political choice to be made as to the level of funding to be included in the plan.
And we look at it at a later date. I mean, that's something that can be done. Otherwise, I'm not sure. I want to maintain the level that we're at the moment. I would like to think that through the urban fund that's being allocated by the government, that we will be able to qualify for some funds there, which may be able to accelerate the development of our cycleway in certain parts of the city, and I'm thinking in particular of the South Dunedin area. We've got the largest catchment of school children in the whole of the city, and that should be finished completed. Then the rest of the city will follow on after that. And then, of course, you've got other issues like the State Highway number 1, but that's essentially NZTA project. So there are a whole lot of issues here, and I'm unsure as to what I certainly want to keep the NZTA in the picture because it's essential to us that we have their support, and I also want to ensure that we get a piece of the $100 million that are coming from central government. So that being said, I think if we maintain what we're doing as number 2, if that can go into the annual plan, that doesn't in any way at all penalise us for working with the NZTA in the future, nor central government.
Councillor Bezet, are you foreshadowing a motion?
Yes, I guess I am really. Yeah.
Because I'm just conscious that we're in question time, and if you are,
I'm trying to move it on because it's a really complex.
Well, note that you might want to move something, and I'll get rid of the rest of the questions first. Councillor Thompson.
Look, it's been touched on, but it's going to take on the status of an urban myth shortly if we don't actually deal to it. I did send through a question in advance. The 300-odd thousand of reduced, in inverted commas, parking revenue is predicated on the notion that everybody that would have parked in a car park that has been removed turns around and goes back home again, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So, I rest my case. It is necessary to make sure this is clear. You originally quoted a figure, not exactly, but around $300,000. I'll wait till you originally answered a question of Councillor Calvert as to what the loss of revenue might be from the removal of parking meters, and you indicated that it was in the vicinity of $300,000. I don't have the exact figure in front of me. I came back and asked you if you could clarify that and what basis that figure was provided, and your answer was that it was based on taking the total revenue from those parking meters. So that $300,000 figure is predicated on an assumption that the people who would have parked in that park do not park somewhere else.
That's correct. It's just the what those parking meters that would be removed, it's the revenue that they took in the 12-13 year. We would not expect the hit to be that great because we would expect that maybe 80% of those, or maybe higher, of those people currently parking at those parking meters would actually pay to park somewhere else, and that could be a DCC parking meter, parking building, it could be a Wilson's car park, so some of that revenue would be redistributed, and then we would expect some percentage to not make the trip at all, or to change mode and maybe share a ride with a friend or whatever. So yes, there would be some redistribution. So yeah, you're right, the loss of revenue wouldn't be entirely that figure by any stretch.
It wouldn't even be close to that figure. Thank you.
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, my question was, one of my questions has essentially been asked and answered. And a subtle but significant difference in the conclusion and the recommendation in the report. The last line of the report, the reading, it's expected that $350,000 is required in 15-16 for parking mitigation, and the recommendation saying up to $350,000 in 15-16, but staff comments subsequent would suggest that $350,000 is in fact a worst case scenario figure, which makes me wonder why that wasn't mentioned in this paper.
So those are the potential costs. They are conservative, I suppose, in terms of it could be a worst case scenario. We're not necessarily, it's a cost that may be borne in that year. It's still uncertain at this stage as to the timing and also the nature of it, as we've talked about earlier in the session. We're not necessarily, there's probably a bit further discussion to be had whether we would actually consider putting a budget aside of that similar nature in this period at this stage.
And just secondly, from your conversations that you've had, and it is hard to gauge exactly what the Urban Cycleway Fund is going to do. That's what happens when you make up policy on the hoof. But is it your understanding that were we to increase our contribution to this project, that would make it more likely that it would attract funding from the Urban Cycleway Fund?
It wouldn't necessarily attract. I'm just thinking in terms of that money that would be put inside the State Highway, I'm assuming you're referring to as predominantly for the parking. It would be uncertain whether that would attract urban cycleway funding as a result.
Oh, I'm not talking about State Highway 1.
Are you generalising?
Sorry.
Look, I suppose the essence of it is that the cycleway fund itself the urban cycleway fund is only available at this stage for a 4-year period. So the more local share that we have available from our side, the more chance that and more ability to access that urban cycleway fund that we have.
Councillor Wilson.
I have a couple of questions because I'm not sure that we've all got consistent ideas, and I think there were some suggestions that there were some errors in this report as relates to FAR that I'm not sure that everyone understands. The FAR ratings, so on page 18.14.7, my understanding that category of the revised FAR rate isn't quite correct, or is it? DCC's contribution. Okay. Now, well, that does change how we look at things. So when and just going further with Councillor Hawkins' previous question, the graph on 18.14.6, that is based purely on FAR funding. So if we put another 41,000 in this financial year, that we're talking about, then we'd get 100,000 under FAR rating. But if we were to put in 41,000, there may also be, and do we know any idea of what rate the UAC Urban Cycling Fund might come in at? Third of the total project. So what would that be given that line? No. That's one. So we'd get another 33,000.
Sorry?
We'd get another 33,000 from the Urban Fund.
Yes. So for 41,000 So for 41,000 additional local share, we'd have 133,000 of expenditure.
Which is a bit. I was going to foreshadow a motion which is different from Councillor Bezette's, and I've given it to Pam, but it also dealt with the review suggested by Richard, and it's up there, but I'm just letting you know that when you're ready, Mr. Chair.
Sorry?
I've put two motions up to Pam, which are different, which suggest 500,000 for the purposes of the long-term plan. I'm just letting you know that.
Right, thank you. Councillor McTavish.
Thank you, Worship. A couple of different categories of question, I guess. The first are related to the broader cycleways funding. Jean, you stated that historically, what is currently in the budget for this year is what we have historically had, but I'm not entirely sure that that's correct. So for the last 3 years, my recollection is that we've had $500,000 in the budget, and that has been matched by NZTA at 66% to 33%, which has meant that the funding which we have invested every year has been 1.5 million over the last each of the last 3 years.
Yes, that is correct. I was more referring to the long-term plan that's in front of you from 15-16 is consistent with what, of $1 million per annum, is consistent with what the previous long-term plan had. But you are correct, in terms of the last 3 years, there was 1.5 million of expenditure per annum based on a 66-34 share.
So if we were to sign off on what we have in our budgets in front of us, that would be tantamount to a reduction in the level of service that we have been providing in terms of capital investment in this network on the last 3 years.
It is a net reduction in terms of expenditure from the 1.5 to 1. That's correct.
Just to be careful about our language use, because of course it won't result in a reduction of level of service. It will slow down the increase in level of service in terms of what, because this is a new level of service for the community.
I understand that, yeah. But in terms of the capital expenditure program, it would be a reduction. Yeah.
Reduction compared to the past 3 years, but consistent with what was looking forward.
Thank you. In relation to some of the issues which have been highlighted in relation to South Dunedin and the roll-up, would it be fair to say that some of the issues that have arisen have been as a result of well-meaning attempts to get the most bang for our buck out of a very limited budget when we're wanting to do quite a lot with it?
Yes.
Thank you. In terms of parking, the report indicates that NZTA, or it is as yet unclear whether NZTA would be willing to co-fund any parking mitigation options. And I'm just wondering, why is it that NZTA would be unwilling to co-fund that?
That, as we talked about it right at the start, I suppose, that they are the two parts to NZTA. One is the project side, which is, they're a bit clearer in terms of where the budgets and costs were, whereas the funding arm has taken no firm position on it. And over time, we are getting a sense of a more openness to the co-investment, that if there's a project which has consequential effects, that in a lot of cases, or not all cases, it depends on the circumstances, they will fund or share in that cost as such. So it depends on the nature of the project and how the design works through as to where those costs lie.
So, in terms of the view that they wouldn't fund, where is that coming from? What is the perspective?
It's not so much that they wouldn't fund it. The view is that's more coming from the project side, what we call the highways side of it, that they are working to a sort of budget estimate. So they have probably a slightly firmer view on that side, whereas the funding arm is expecting that there's further work to be done through what we call the detailed design phase to a portion where those costs may lie. And there's no fixed view on that at this stage. They're very open to probably a slightly different view to what the HNO arm of NZTA would have. So my sort of suggested approach in terms of a budget side of thing is not to allocate, just using that figure that's put in the report of the 350, is that we would let the next phase of work, which we're doing through the working party, etc., and the design, will deal with where those costs may lie. But there would need to be an acknowledgement that there is a risk that's present to us, that there may be a need to find some money to deal with the parking costs, but we just don't know where they fall yet.
And so in terms of one of the suggestions that has been brought forward as a possible option to mitigate that parking loss as being a Frederick Street car park, my understanding is that that could be achieved at no cost to the ratepayer. my question therefore is, how many parks might that building be able to accommodate? And why would we provide budget, if it's more than 300, which is the total number which may be removed under the worst case scenario, why would we put additional budget in to provide for more car parks than can be achieved at no cost to the ratepayer?
We're not suggesting that the budget at this stage is put aside.
Right.
There's further discussion to be had there. Just sort of mentioned before, the preference is not to put the budget aside, but yet have that discussion to figure out where those costs might fall. But just acknowledge with that, it could fall on our side, or some could fall on our side that we may not have budgeted for. But to put some budget in there at the moment, in my opinion, would be premature.
Thank you. And just in relation to the actual numbers that you have in the table on table 5, which talks about which incorporates the urban cycleway funding contribution, as I understand it. The option 3, which is the increased local share, would amount to $6.5 million of expenditure over the 3-year period. I note that it's in terms of the value of the money or of the projects that were put into the proposal that went to NZTA, the total value of those products is $12.6 million. My question therefore is, if we were to put in the increased local share that has been suggested under option 3, is that in fact maximising the opportunity that exists, or the potential opportunity that exists over the next 3 years? Or are we missing out on funding opportunities, central government funding opportunities, because we are not maximising our local share?
It's a bit difficult to answer, but it does, I suppose, in one respect, increase the potential additional revenue that we could get through the Urban Cycleway Fund. So the first thing is you've got to have the local share available to tap into that money. But on the other hand, it is still contestable and will depend on the other demands and the other priorities that are and submissions that are put forward by other cities, etc. So there's no guarantees that that money would come to us as such, but what we're finding though and hearing from them is that we've got a reasonably developed, I suppose, cycle network or strategy for a cycle network, that we're in a good position to tap into that through the work we've done so far and the work that we're planning to do.
So in that option 3, how much of that $100 million are we thinking that we will attract? My guess there is about 3 mil, but that's probably at the upper side. I guess my question is, are we actually being ambitious enough? Because it doesn't seem to me that we're being particularly ambitious if we're only thinking that we will attract $3 million of that $100 million fund and we're getting such positive signals from NZTA.
I was just going to say that possibly that's true. We just wanted to give you some examples of how to show how it would work. The last time that I spoke to the NZTA cycle team, they said that we should pass on to you that this is probably the best time to invest in cycling over these next 4 years with this additional funding available, and that would make your money go further. But obviously it's up to you how much you want to try and take advantage of that.
Okay, and just a final question. Have we done any benchmarking against other cities? I know that, for example, Christchurch is looking at rolling out 13 cycleways across its network over the next couple of years. Wellington has tripled their budget, I think. Auckland has tripled their budget. Have we done any work looking at where that leaves us, expenditure-wise, and how much? Because I imagine that local share, that demonstration of local share commitment will be weighed up in the thinking around that $100 million fund.
We do keep a watching brief on the activities of those other authorities, and there is a group that meets in Wellington, which I'm part of similar managers, so we can talk through these issues. And the NZTA did make a comment that our our financial commitment is quite a lot less than those within Wellington and Christchurch and Auckland, for example. But yeah, that's the only comment I can make.
Thank you.
Okay, now just to let everyone know where we're at, I've got 4 more people down here to ask questions, and we're overdue for a lunch break, so I'm going to endeavour to get through those, and they'll take as long as they'll take. We need to ask them, but if they take a bit longer, then we might stop before question time's finished and go for lunch, but let's give it a go anyway. So Councillor Banks, your question.
Getting back to on page 18, 14, 17, Portobello Road enhancements, item 2. I read in the ODT that there was a suggestion that it had cost, or it was planned to cost $625,000 to do that section of the Portobello Road enhancement, item 2. Have I got that correctly, or is that something I've misread?
So, as was mentioned before, this was a submission to NZTA to indicate what other possible projects or part of projects that could source some extra funding in terms of accelerated rollout. And this was to a certain extent a element of top-up funding that would have been desirable from our perspective to obtain from NZTA to support that project. But the project itself is still being completed. Will be completed to address the problems that we're facing or had historically faced with it. So that project there, it was just to give an indication again to NZTA of what size of program, what sort of things that we could utilise some funding for.
So the $625,000 figure that I read was actually relating to the budget for that section?
Yes, was that a figure that was in the newspaper?
Yeah, okay.
That figure was incorrect for some, and we're not sure of the source for that. But we're working through a process at the moment, so we know there's the level of expenditure being put on that road already. We're working through a process with the business owners that are coming up with some designs that will improve the project. And I'm just trying to think of the numbers and that's likely not to be that figure.
So if it isn't $625,000, what is it expected to be?
The additional work that we're looking at the moment for the next phase.
No, I'm talking the whole chunk from the BP service station to the shore that the ODT said was budgeted at $625,000. What is it now? What's your best estimate?
Okay. So in terms of the work completed to date, we'll have to verify these figures, but I understand that the cost for that first phase of work was around $250,000, and the estimates that we're looking at for a range of options to complete the works and provide a much greater level of service for the road users and the cyclists is around about $300,000.
So the ODT figure was more than double of what it's actually going to be, is that what you're saying?
So that would be the total cost. So I'd have to read the article again to see what the context was. If we add the two together, 250 plus 300, around about the 550 total.
Additional. Okay. So 550 total. How many metres long is that particular stretch? I see section 1's 1.3 kilometres. Roughly how long is the Portobello enhancement?
I couldn't give you a complete and accurate answer, but figuratively I'd say it's probably 300 to 400 metres.
Okay.
Is that a bit longer than that?
From Portobello petrol station
from the BP to the shore.
No, it's about a kilometre.
Okay. If it is just over a kilometre, it still works out that the cost is somewhere in the region of, I've just worked it out quickly here, somewhere in the region of over $400 per metre. How can you spend $400 per metre providing a cycleway?
It's providing a lot more.
I mean, well, obviously someone's managed to do it, but I recently put in a tarp myself, asphalt, 1.5 metres wide, $66 a metre. This is 400. How do you get there?
certainly, once you deal on a public road, costs and the environment has a whole lot of other considerations, traffic management, etc. But in general, if we were to look at the cost for the cycleway in isolation, to build the cycleway on its own, the cost is probably relatively minor. When we're talking the larger figure, which includes the next phase of work, a lot of those costs is in removal of existing infrastructure such as the median and adjustments to the road width to make sure that the road fits the range of its users' needs, and in that case it's quite industrial, so it's a matter of in some cases widening driveways to provide better access into the industrial properties there. So a lot of the cost is not in the cycleway itself.
It's the other bits and pieces.
It's the other bits, and this is the thing that we're finding in terms of, use the word retrofitting, new types of modes into roads or networks which are historically designed for vehicles.
Is that why essentially the South Dunedin section of the cycleway has ended up costing almost double what was originally planned?
In part.
Okay. If we go to the State Highway 1 cycleway project, it's been said that the question is how to mitigate the loss of parking. The question how to mitigate the loss of parking assumes that you can mitigate the loss of parking. Can we actually build a parking building? Can we actually afford to build a parking building? Is it realistic to even suggest that we could mitigate the loss of potentially hundreds of car parks on State Highway 1?
So in terms of the potential for a parking building, there's some further work being done on that concept at the moment, taking a slightly commercial perspective, I suppose, and perhaps Tony might be able to provide further details on that. But likewise, we've also, through the process on State Highway 1 so far, in a conceptual sense, considered other parking mitigations options, but not in a great detail yet. Just general sort of scope of where there might be some, for example, private land that could be converted to car parks to help mitigate the off-street stuff.
Okay, private land, that's one I hadn't heard of before, but I'm glad to note it. The Chief Executive has suggested that you could move parking to other locations. Given that parking in the CBD and along the one-way streets has become sufficiently pressured that those other locations already extend up to and include the green belt, areas around Moana Pool and up to where I live in Roslyn, simply because people can't get a park anywhere in town, or certainly not a free one. The move to other locations that has been suggested, apart from the green belt itself, what other locations are there? You've suggested private land, which my understanding of is totally unaffordable in the area because of student developments. There's no way you could afford to buy any private land. What other locations could you move this parking to? Given that you can't afford a parking building and private land's just too expensive.
So in the context of the term private land, there's no suggestion that we'd be purchasing the land. There is just that these are options as such that might be available to help mitigate the options. There's a range of things. Another option is angle parking, etc. So it's a whole lot of conceptual options, or a mixture of those at particular spots that we've been looking at a very broad level.
Okay.
Through your worship, you're asking us a series of questions that require a lot more work. Part of the program that we're looking at around the State Highway 1 is looking at the options for providing for the mitigation of parks, as Jean was alluding to, and as you've been providing information before. There are options for angle parking and other blocks. There will be an impact on parking, we understand that. There's also going to be work done with individual businesses about their access needs as a result of if there is a cycleway that goes in. There's the issue of the side roads that come off from the State Highway in terms of their provision for parking. There's quite a bit of work that needs to be done. In terms of the car park building, there has been a proposal for that floating around for a number of years. The property manager is looking at some potential ways of investigating commercial development of that site. It might still have a cost, but that's being worked through. The impact on parking is well understood. The project work needs to be gone through, working with NZTA about how to mitigate that, and there will be, if there is a loss of parking on the state line, there will be a migration and movement of parking to the other areas. That's our experience.
My question was, what other areas, given that they've already been migrated to?
The areas surrounding, you know what they are. It might be, people make decisions themselves.
Okay. You've said, Mr. Avery, just now that there's a lot more work, that the car park building is not budgeted, and yet in recommendation 2 we're to decide a funding level for the strategic cycle network. How can we possibly decide a funding level when we really have nothing to go on? How can we know what the parking building is going to cost, what the direct and indirect costs of parking loss are? The indirect costs being, for instance, reduced patronage to Otago Museum because people can't park there anymore. The indirect costs of businesses not able to attract the same patronage because, as Ms Connolly has suggested, some people of the 100% that would normally go to these parks may not go there at all simply because parking is too hard. How do we...
Councillor Vandevers, you're asking questions, making a whole lot of assumptions about the answers before you've even finished the question. And you have been given answers largely around the fact that the work is continuing on this, and clearly the specific answers can't be given at the moment.
So why are we asked to give a specific funding level if there's no specific answer?
You have to work within the parameters of knowledge that we have at the time, but your questions have been answered, and what your questions are doing now is just giving a lot of prejudgments on your part, and that's your right to do, but don't frame them as answers, because then as questions, because they're not. So I'm going to call it a halt there.
Can I just make perhaps one more question for clarification? This paper isn't about individual projects. State Highway Cycling will come back as an individual project for consideration. This is about the level of funding that the council wants to put into the cycleway network overall. So if you want to, and there is an option for potentially increasing access to the additional 100 million from NZTA by increasing some local share, that's a question for you to debate and make a decision. This doesn't deal with individual, it does try to provide some greater information around the options where we might be able to spend some more money effectively, but it's not about individual projects in here. Those individual projects will come back in time.
Now what I'm going to do is call a lunch break now, and we'll be back here at 25 to 2, and we'll pick up on the final questions, and then we'll go into the discussion around motions that have to work out which ones we're going to go for, because I'll talk to both of you. Welcome back, councillors. Now we'll resume with the questions, and the next one is Councillor White.
Thank you. Just going back over Portobello Road and Anson's Bay Road, and in response to Councillor Vandevers, there was a $300,000 there was $250,000 and $300,000, a $550,000 spend. Can you just go back over that for me, please?
So the first phase of works, which is what you see now, essentially was a report cost of about $250,000. The next phase of works, which is currently in detailed design and being discussed with a number of the businesses that access their properties via that road, that's got a provisional estimate of around $300,000 for a range of options.
Okay. Looking through that and looking through some of the other items in the report, do we have a budget for community engagement? You know, so we essentially can mitigate some of these issues down the road?
We don't have a budget per se which identifies a specific line item. but it is an area where we will be putting more effort into, utilising our existing budget and resources to do that.
And looking at spending more money in the media to tell the story and things like that?
Yep, that's potential options that we can use to do things better.
Okay. Going back to the $12.6 million spending, as I look at it, if we looked at the $12.6 million over the next 4 years, with an average of NZTA funding of 57%, that would be a contribution from NZTA of 7.1 million. So the DCC contribution would be around the 5.5 million. Am I pretty much on the mark there?
Yes, that's correct in terms of the rough funding assistant ratio and excluding any urban cycleway funding contributions.
And so obviously dividing that by 4 years would be a cost to the DCC and the ratepayers of 1.375 million. And
that would be over 3 years because this first year. That's correct.
so about 1.8 million. Or have we already spent some of the 12.6 million already?
No, we haven't.
Okay. So it would be 5.5 divided by 3 would be around 1.8 million. Would be 1.
Those rough figures sound correct in terms of what a local share would be required, excluding the urban cycleway fund.
1.9. Okay. And then that doesn't even include any urban cycleway fund.
That's correct.
Okay. So if we added another third to that, then you're probably looking just over 1.1 million.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. If you deducted a third from that share, which would be topped up by the urban cycleway fund, that's correct.
So basically for a 3.3 million spend over 3 years, we're getting a $12.6 million return.
Yep, those are the rough figures. And that's presuming that the NZTA would fund those programs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cowan.
I'm wondering if we're having a report into where we are or where we could be going or what order we could be doing things in, and it includes anything to do with the vexed question of parking. Could we have the mitigation of the loss of parks separate from the loss of income for the DCC, which they seem to be sort of conflated in together here. They're not the same thing. If, for instance, we had somebody else building a new parking building or whatever, so as that we replaced those parks, as I think Councillor McTavish might have suggested, if somebody else built that building, we would still lose the income from the parks. So that would be a separate thing. Mitigating the effect on our budgets is a separate thing than mitigating the loss of parking, both of which are important, but if we could have that described in separate ways so it's quite clear. You know, we may be able to get 3/4 of the parking replaced by something else, but a third of the money, or who knows. So if we could have that as part of the report, is that if there was a suggestion that we were heading, I thought there was a suggestion earlier that we were heading down looking at having some report about what we might do if we approved any money in the future. We haven't sort of quite got these up on the board that we might be about to have some sort of...
There's already work underway that was asked for around the state highway changes to come back and talk to you about parking mitigation. I didn't say, actually, Councillor Vendibus, that we were going to mitigate parking. What I said, staff are looking at options. So that work is underway. That's why it's not up on the board, because it was asked for by you last time we talked about the state highway changes. So all of that is in the mix for what might be the approach to parking.
Secondly, the part of the way through the long-term plan is 200,000 a year turning up in our budgets for maintenance of the cycle network. I'd like to know whether that changes as we grow the cycle network, whether NZTA is coming to the party partly on that, or where that fits in, because that's new funding that we need that is proposed in here, but it's new funding because of the new things. I'd just like to know whether as we grow that figure will automatically increase, and how that fits in with a comment earlier about that list of things, some of which might or might not have felt like maintenance compared with, you know, in that 200,000, would that include something like the 100,000 of resealing or initially sealing or whatever it is?
So, first part of the question, the $200,000 of maintenance, and I can't recall the exact year, but it's probably about year 4 or 5 that it starts, is reflecting of the current plan or cycle development over time, over the course here. So that's an expected level of maintenance that would be required to maintain the network that we're rolling out, that's currently planned for. In terms of, so if there was a change in the program size, etc., then there would need to be some consideration of the funding level of maintenance as well. So that would change that theoretically, increase your cycleway infrastructure. There would be a corresponding increase in maintenance requirement as well.
So does that include? Hopefully, we would have included. We would have done the Portobello thing at that stage. Does it include maintaining that?
Yes, it does.
Right. And is it funded at all by NZTA or just by us?
Yep, so in cycleways, unlike which can be in some cases considered shared paths, are subsidisable activities, whereas your more traditional pedestrian footpath only is not subsidised. So yes, cycleways maintenance is a subsidised activity.
So would have FAR
yes.
at them reducing?
Yes, that's right.
And the last question, were you aware that NZTA is currently wanting to put on its radar that they have realised that although they own some of the roads, which is why they might want to fully fund a cycle network, they are aware that local bodies have been taking the revenue on those roads for parking, and they are indicating that they're going to put that on the radar, that they understand that their roads are being used by us for parking and us taking the revenue.
No, I'm personally not aware of any conversations in NZTA or central government that takes that angle.
It could make some difference about whether they thought that they would help us in any way mitigate parking, because they could well, over time, change their view and say, you're already taking our parking money for our road, don't ask us to pay it twice.
On the other hand,
they're already making a contribution by doing it.
On the other hand, if they're planning to take that parking money off us, we lose it either way. And so it's actually them that put the loss for the State Highway 1 railway, the State Highway 1 cycleway. But we haven't been notified of that change in any way.
Councillor Bazet,
no, I'll my question answered.
Okay. Before I come to Councillor Wilson, can I just ask Jean, as a result of the questions, is there anything you want to clarify about this?
Probably just one point. So just to clarify that in the current pre-draft budget that you've got in front of you, that's let's call it tabled at the moment, there is expenditure of $1 million per annum, which is consistent with what was in the previous annual plan looking forward, but not consistent with the last 3 years, because that was around 1.5 per annum. So with that, because of the reducing FAR, we've changed from last year was a $340,000 local share contribution. This year, the first year will be $410,000, and thereafter increasing by $10,000, pretty much for the 10-year plan of the plan. So that maintains the $1 million expenditure at the moment. So those figures exclude any contribution, or let's call it, use a phrase, top up from an urban cycleway fund as well, and or the choice for you today is to consider changing that local share to maximise the external revenue support.
Thanks, Jean. Councillor Wilson, now you had either a motion or a suggestion. So,
It's come out, and I think the first one on the ranks was John, but I think he's happy to defer to the motion. We've discussed it. Is that right, John? Yep, thank you. I've got a motion here, and it may surprise some people to the quantum, but there's two parts to this. There's an item in the unfunded, which is going to make our lives treacherous, and if we don't deal with it now, then potentially, I've just decided it's best to deal with it now, and that is the cycle bridge. This morning, wonderfully, you proceeded to make a 10-year project of the Portobello Road a 3-year project. Now, in the regional transport plan, you've also wanted to do the Eastern Bypass work, which means that you've got a conflict developing on two projects at the Jetty Street overbridge. The cyclists have to cross what we're trying to make into a good bypass. In order to deal with that issue, I'm going to be seeking under the unfunded works that the cycleway, the bridge from the harbour to the city, be accelerated as well to overcome any issues of that conflict. That project may also be able to get urban cycle funding, is my understanding, albeit it hasn't really been on the list, or some of that work is on the list, and to be investigated. I was going to move that we put 500,000 in the budget for the purposes of the strategic cycle network as it is, but I'm now suggesting that that be 650, including the harbour to city cycling walking bridge in the strategic cycle network, which means that it would, and if that's included, then it would be able to potentially get urban cycle money. So that's the change that I've just done since lunch, and hopefully that explains it. But this means that we can get the best bang for the buck, and I think it's all doable within the timeframes given, and gives a very clear indication to this government that we appreciate the funding that they're making available and that we are ready to rock on and develop with it. Do you want me, that explains that, but I'm happy to speak to the motion itself if I get a seconder.
Yes, I understood that you may be waiting, I've got a couple of questions. One, that you may be waiting to do the rest of the unfunded transportation stuff.
Well, you could. The other one is that we could stop the discussion now and do it as unfunded. I'm relaxed either way. It's easy to get this one out of the way.
In the first instance, is there a second? Yeah, right. So is there a seconder for this? Councillor McTavish? Okay. Well, let's do it. And I remind everyone that everything that we do throughout the meeting is subject to confirmation at the end anyway. So in one sense, it doesn't matter if you do things in a different order, even if they implicate one another, because we're going to do a wash-up. So...
Yep. But that's there. And the Portobello's done very quickly, that's why. So, it would be helpful if everyone went to page 1816.4, and I've explained better why I think this is important.
Just Mr. Mealy, the 1816.4 that Councillor was stating to us is part of the report on the transportation capital unfunded projects. And you'll see that the Harbour Bridge, City to Harbour pedestrian cycle bridge is there in years 2024 to 25. So as I understand, what you'd be asking for as part of that is to bring that forward.
I think what we did...
The only question I raised procedurally is whether that should be dealt with under this item or when you get to this 10-year capital.
And I'm happy if you want to leave it to them, but I understand both sides.
If we deal with it now, I'm sure you won't vote to put it back in again when we deal with the next item, or vice versa, have the whole debate again if you decide not to put it in.
I'll take the lead of the chair. You're happy to be up with now? Okay. The issue here is that the Eastern Freight Bypass, which is heavily supported at a regional transport level, as being something that needs to be done, and that's the traffic that takes people from State Highway 1 under the Anderston Railway Bridge, Strathallan Street, to Portsmouth Drive and onto State Highway 88. That's a key transport freight route that we want to encourage. It takes traffic away from what has turned out to be relatively awkward turns at St Andrew Street off the State Highway 1, further north on State Highway 1. It's definitely supported by the freight companies and AA. That has been suggested under the unfunded work, and I'm hopeful that later you will be accepting some funding in for that. But if we do that job and the Portobello one, and we get a substantial or even a mildly significant increase in commuters, we're asking for a clash under the bridge, Jetty Street. That's where they cross. And it's quite hard to cross there as a cyclist or a walker already off Portsmouth Drive under the Jetty Street overbridge. In order to make sure that we're not creating a conflict for ourselves, I'm suggesting that we need to look at the City to Harbour pedestrian cycle bridge being brought forward at least the planning stage, and that into that it needs to be done, but also the opportunity with the urban cycle network to get the funding assistance for that just makes sense. So that's why I put it in the way we've done. It has to be part of the cycle network in order to get the urban cycle funding. That's why I've also added that in B. Now, I just want to say that this is a really key part of cycling is a really key part of not only the integrated transport strategy, but about how the city connects. I believe that it will benefit in so many ways. It talks to the economic development strategy. We've heard how the university are keen to see it developed because that's what their key staff want to see developed. We've heard it from businesses in Dunedin who want to, their workers want to be able to cycle to work and be safe. We've heard it from schools. We've heard it from so many people. I hear it daily from the people on the Otago Central Rail Trail who get off having ridden their bikes for the first time in 40 years and say, gosh, it would be neat to be able to bike safely in my city. It's not about the people that are biking now, it's about the people who aspire to do it, and it's about the children who have no other way of getting around the city any other way. In order to change the city quickly and to stop having disconnected routes, we have to start putting more money in to get those connections done, to get it done well, and that's a real challenge. We learned a lot in the last year and a bit. We've got the staff and the capacity and the resources. We've got the staff and the capacity to do it. We now have to give them the resources to do it. And this is a plea to say, let's put it into the long-term plan, see how people feel about it. I know that the AA were surprised, pleasantly, to find that 40% of their 37,000 members in Otago are cyclists. They want to get out there, they've got bikes, there are people keen to do it. So why not let it happen, and let it happen well, instead of tinkering around the edges and making it a slow development. You would never create a roading network that didn't connect and had 2 bits of road and say, oh my gosh, people aren't driving it. Well, they're not going to drive it if they can't connect. Equally the same with cyclists, and especially if it's not safe. We need to start making this a safe experience, and we have to start saying it's actually the motorists that also benefit. No motorist wants to have an accident with cyclists. It's an accident waiting to happen the way we've designed our streets, because all we've cared about is about the motor car. We have to start saying everyone has a right to be transport in their mode safely, and we need to fund it. We put millions and millions into roading. We do that every year. Now it's a chance to say actually we have to share the streets.
Councillor Hawkins. I thought you had your...
No, I was just volunteering to second the motion, but it's been...
Oh, I see. That's fine. Thanks. Councillor Carroll.
I was perhaps wanting to ask a question, or I'm not sure what to do with this. We've just heard that the AA supports something in Eastern, heavy truck, a lot of people on the Eastern bypass or whatever it is support it, and that other people do. Is there intended to be any sort of report or anything from that? Because what we've tended to get reported to us is that people support something or like it or something, and to me I'd feel much more comfortable if we're putting things out for consultation, that we could give, actually, if somebody has formed a view, which we've just been told they have, in support of something, that we have that view in writing out there so as that people can know what they actually think. Have we got any ability to add to that resolution something that puts that out in the...
What I can tell you is that I expect that when the Regional Land Transport Plan comes out very shortly, subject to a meeting that we're having on Monday to do that, my understanding is that you'll find that it's got support of both. It was seen as a regionally significant project by Southland and Otago councils, and input from the staff of all this. The Eastern Freight Bypass. Is that
That is correct, and it was a project in the transport strategy that has been consulted on through that process as well.
That doesn't sort of answer a report from people. And this is...
Generally, we provide reports where staff are reporting to you about who supports things. Reports about how each of you come to decisions about what you do and don't support is really beyond the scope of my staff to present reports on, if you don't mind me saying so. So if my staff are saying the AA are supportive, then I expect them to be able to back that up. But you can say that to each other without a report from us. But if you want us to double check that, we can certainly do that.
The reason I'm asking is because we now, in reference to a earlier comment, I think by Councillor Bezet, we are now forming more and more working parties of people who then have in their heads knowledge about what a group of people think, and we don't seem to ever hear back from whoever these working parties and things are, and so we don't actually have... I would really like to have out there some actual things from...
Well, in this instance, Councillor, you're asking the mover to put in the motion pretty much everything she's quoted or said in speaking to it, and I don't think that's reasonable. And in any case, both you and I are in the room when the AA expressed the support for the cycleway, so I think it's a red herring. It's up to the mover what she puts or he puts in their motion.
But just further to that, it doesn't the cycleway liaison group, and doesn't that give you some measure of comfort with regards to input from outside organisations? I mean, the AA are involved in that, the Chamber of Commerce, Spokes, and a number of other organisations that have an interest. They are reporting on that, and I mean that certainly, I certainly take comfort from that liaison group that they are in there. With the interests of the particular institutions at heart, which reflects back on us, I think.
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Vanders.
Brief question, I think, for Mr. Renshaw. We're talking about funding levels in recommendation 2. I'd like to know what funding level is going to be necessary to fund what we've just decided is the accelerated Peninsula Cycleway. What level of funding do we have to basically commit to, not to do all the other stuff that's been talked about, the State Highway 1 and all the rest of it, just to do the accelerated Peninsula plan, cycleway?
So you're referring to the Portobello safety improvements report that we discussed?
Yeah, the one that we've just ticked off as yes, we're going to do it, it's going to be accelerated. What level of funding do we need to put into the plan to do that?
Yep. So just referring back to page 18.13.7, and we decided to put option 2 in, correct me if I'm wrong, and the local share based on an assumption of 45-55 split. The rates requirement over years 15, so all years 1, 2 and 3, and I'll talk that through. First year 495,000, second year 4.2 million, and 4.2 million third year.
So sorry, first year 495,000 and then subsequent years 4.2 million and 4.2 million.
That's correct. So this is, I interpreted your discussion was the Portobello Road safety improvement, so from the city out to Harrington Point, etc.
So we're essentially committed to that.
The DCC share.
Is what?
That's what we passed, or what was resolved to be included.
And those figures are the DCC share, or is that?
Yes, that's the DCC share.
Okay. So that's 9 million.
8.9 million.
Thank you.
Currently in the 10-year plan there is 11.4.
Okay, thanks for that.
Further speakers? We're in discussion, although I'll take questions if... Councillor Banks.
I'm quite happy to vote for the 8.9 million that's just been identified for the accelerated peninsula cycleways. I believe that because of...
It is not a cycle network that was being voted for. It was seawall and safety works on Portobello Road. It's quite different and misleading to say it's a cycle project. It wouldn't be getting funding the way it is if it were.
Could I ask you to rule on the point of order, Your Worship?
The point of order was a clarification more than that, and a clarification has been made that the thing that we voted on before was a comprehensive thing. So it's been said, and it's been said in public, and my ruling on it is that that's correct. Now, if you'd like to carry on.
Was your ruling that it's correct, or was your ruling that it's a valid point of order?
My ruling is that it's correct.
Is it or is it not a valid point of order, Your Worship? I'm getting a little tired of these invalid points of order that you let slide.
I have said that it was correct. You asked me if it was correct or
No, I asked you if it was valid as a point of order. Understanding orders, we have certain requirements for a point of order to be a point of order. I'm tired of being interrupted by points of order, which my reading of standing orders suggest is not a point of order.
It's misrepresentation.
I will take a moment to speak to the governance officer.
Thank you.
And you can get over your tiredness in the meantime.
12 saw D. Does this go to? Yes, the D. What I mean.
Yes, well, I will uphold the point of order.
In that case, there's no point in me carrying on.
Ratified. Any other speakers? Councillor Moon.
Just a point of clarification, it's probably a question for Councillor Wilson. The monies that's incorporated in the 650 for the bridge across the railway line from the harbour to the city will be required for a feasibility study or further design work or whatever. It's got nothing to do with physical construction because that's a larger number in a later year.
This, at 650 ongoing, and that I can understand being lumpy, would be potentially 450 for this project, which isn't out of other sources and UAC from actually getting it almost over the road, depending on what the figures come out at as costs. But so on page 1816.4, you've got 150,000, 250,000 for design, and then you've got 1,500,000 for construction. So that money does accelerate quite quickly. I'm not saying we're going to get there, but it's the start of having that.
I was just trying to clarify that the 650 amount incorporates the Southern Commuter Network plus some feasibility design work for the bridge.
If you include the bridge in the Southern Cycle Network, yes.
In the build of the bridge.
I'm not, without actually having done the numbers, I'm not sure whether that's correct or not. What we have is that the money that we've got is for the strategic cycle network. There is no funding provision that I'm aware of for the City to Harbour Bridge, which has an estimated cost of about 3.5 million, something like that. Normally we'd actually work through... Sorry?
How much?
3.5. There's 1,500, there's 1.5 million in this next year that's not shown in this particular. And so normally what we do is actually say if it's a $3 million capital item, you'd go through a process and actually make sure that that's what you want to spend it on. And given that the unfunded list includes a number of other significant priorities within that 10-year period, there is a question of when that might fit in. And so normally we'd actually look at a $3 million bridge and go, how do we fund that? And I'm not entirely sure whether 650 a year ongoing would or would not fund that. But it would be normally an item like that would face separate consideration as part of a broader network. We simply haven't done that.
And Your Worship, the reason why I asked the question was I wanted to understand the actual timing of any capital contribution to a bridge. So it fell obviously later on in the LTP rather than earlier. So that was the reason for my question.
In terms of the idea with the report on the unfunded is to give you a 10-year picture of currently unfunded projects that have come up in the transportation space that people have asked to be funded. That's also a way of saying which of these are the highest priority. So one option is to look at that time and go, you want to bring the bridge potentially forward and shift some other things back, because timing's an issue.
Councillor
Yeah, look, I'm just still processing the answer to that. But I think from my perspective, I'm supporting this effectively provisionally. I know that there's a lot of water to go under the bridge in terms of our discussions around transport over the next day or whatever it is, and also reflecting back on our decisions once we have made all of them, and the financial impact of them. What the Chief Executive said when we started this process is that we ought to take a provisional cut at what we aspirationally would like to achieve, and then once we have those baseline budgets ready on the 2nd, we should look back and see how achievable those are. From my perspective, this would be what I would like to see. It may or may not be achievable once we come to the point on the 2nd of February that we can include this in those budgets. But for now, aspirationally, I would like to support this, because I think certainly all indications are that if we are wanting to invest in cycleways, there is significant opportunity to maximise the co-investment from NZTA in those over the next 4 years. There are other cities around the country that will be doing that to a significant extent, and much more significant than we are able to do in this current budget. And I think that we want to ensure that we are doing the best that we possibly can for our residents in bidding for that money. So provisionally, I will support this.
The speakers. Councillor Kelly, you've spoken, but you want to ask a question?
Sorry. Yes, it was a question, and I'm obviously, my head's in the wrong space or something. Where does this bridge go?
It hasn't been designed yet, but it would go over Ward Street, where the old railway crossing was.
Chinese Garden car park, over the railway line.
Over the railway.
And Ward Street. Ward Street? Yeah, Ward Street. And Ward Street.
Pedestrian. Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've long been a supporter of pedestrian-cycle links, at least at grade or appropriate across what is a major disruption in our access routes. In fact, some councillors will recall that the council did buy a bridge, a replica of the one that currently spans the railway line, but there wasn't enough funding to put the lifts at each end of it, and so it was never installed. So that was last century, of course. So having this on the books for people to give us feedback about, I think, is a really positive suggestion. I think most people realise that this is an area where not only do we need safer access across the railway line and the heavy traffic bypass, but it's an area where we need to enable our residents and our visitors to get into the steamer basin and the other area, which is an area that inevitably will develop really quickly in the short term. And I think this should be included in the budget so that we can have community feedback on what people think about the idea and whether or not ultimately at some time, hopefully in the not too distant future, they might support funding for an appropriate construction.
For the speakers, well, I'll express a little like one or two other speakers, cautious support for this. I support the $500,000 going in. The extra for the bridge, I'll support it until such time as we work out whether we've got the headroom for it. But a little bit of context in terms of where the funding's coming from and what's available at the moment. Some months ago, several of us attended, I think it was a Zone 5 and 6 meeting in Invercargill, which we have already mentioned, but NZTA gave quite an extensive presentation there, and they emphasised the fact that the uptake on cycle subsidy funding, cycleways subsidy funding, was just not there among a lot of councils, and urged councils around the room to develop plans if they had them on the books at all, and get in and get some funding. So on the one hand we've got NZTA saying for cycleways there's funding, and on the other hand we've got the FAR review which is reducing funding in a different way. So the lesson I take from that is that if it's within our fiscal means to accelerate our proportion of whatever funding we would like to put into cycleways, then we need to do it sooner rather than later to take advantage of what NZTA clearly prioritises and clearly has available. With regard to the priority of the bridge, it was in long-term plans some years ago, this particular bridge, and was taken out about 4 years ago, I believe, out of any long-term plan because of the need to take out ongoing capital projects to pull our debt risk back. And I don't see it being built in the next 18 months or anything, but it has long been recognised that it would ultimately be necessary. And the discussion was often around the connection between the city and the harbour side was absolutely essential. The discussion was often around, do we put the bridge in to enable development of the harbour side, or do we wait for development of the harbour side, which would demand the building of the bridge? So we know it's needed. It's just a matter of do we put it in first, or do we wait for the need for it in terms of absolute connection. So on those grounds, I would support this, and we'll see on the 2nd of February whether we can fit all of it in. But I think it's an absolutely essential, ultimately will prove to be an absolutely essential part of cycleway infrastructure. But I would point out that actually the bridge wasn't initially conceived as a cycleway. It's a pedestrian connection that's absolutely necessary and would include that from day one. And it may be that the pedestrian part of it would ultimately turn out to be more important than the cycling one. If there are no further speakers, I'll ask the mover to exercise a right of reply.
I'd just like to say that thank you all for the support for it. Take the consequence if we didn't do this, and if we went down and developed both the Eastern Bypass and the Portobello Road, and then had the frustration of being considered the council that didn't look forward and plan for things. It's quite an awful picture that comes in my appears in the ODT, and it certainly would show us as being a council that hadn't planned forward. And I think that having spent some time talking to truck drivers, to AA when we did the business plan for a lot of the stuff, which is meetings that I appreciate that not everyone gets to sit in on, there is certainly an interest in getting that Eastern Bypass operating efficiently and effectively. Putting the lights at the railway bridge caused a great deal of angst. The railway bridge caused a great deal of angst where people stop, and I've heard that and I've listened, and I don't want to add to those problems any further. I think this is an area also that will drive economic development in a number of ways, and definitely have a whole lot of other social benefits. But I'm really excited by the potential of it. I've voted to take it out of the budget at one stage. I think the point has come where we've got development likely around that area that justifies some confidence in looking at it. I certainly don't take away from the fact that there may well be a contribution from development, a reason to put development contributions into potential into this, in development contribution, looking at that. So I'm not saying it's there as a given, but I think it's something we have to at least look at.
Thank you. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
No, recorded, please.
Thank you. We'll move on to. Now, there was just mention the days we have it the time we have at our disposal. As you're aware, we had booked Wednesday yesterday, today and Friday and next Monday for this meeting. Next Monday, as it turns out, may not be needed, but I'm just letting everyone know that if we get through everything by tomorrow, then we won't need Monday. There was some talk initially of taking Monday out of the diaries, but I notice it's still there, and maybe it's
just gone.
Huh?
Gone. Just gone.
Well, I'm suggesting that if it only came out half an hour ago, that we just drop it back in again tentatively. But I'm just letting council know that if we get through everything tomorrow, we won't need it. It's a challenge for us all. Central City Plan 10-year program. This is on 18.15.1.
Just before we start, is this memo being circulated? Pam, is the memo being circulated? Pam has the memo. Fantastic.
So there's an extra memo that will just take a few moments to distribute. On page. I suggest we just allow a couple of minutes for everyone to briefly read it, and then perhaps you guys can just go over this to clarify, particularly the memo.
I'll just reiterate some points that are in the memo. Essentially, we've had some feedback that it was unclear as to what is the level of unfunded expenditure that we might want to debate in this forum here. So this draws just together quickly the two reports that we put forward, the Central City Plan we're about to discuss, but also the unfunded capital projects, to give you a picture. If we take those things into consideration, what is the level of unfunded stuff if we take in a Central City Plan perspective? So the dollars that are there right at the bottom are the difference between what's in the current pre-draft LTP that you're considering, and is made up of changes to the amenity budget, but also the other changes that are set out in the unfunded transportation capital report, which is next up.
Are these dollars or thousands of dollars?
thousands of dollars. Sorry, that's missing there.
It's a rather important thing to be missing, is it?
Where you've got a negative, is that unfunded bit, or is a positive indicating unfunded?
It's a negative showing a change, a 750,000, in that case, bottom line 350 change to the current budget. So that will run through the column which you might be referring to in 16-17.
Yeah.
That is a change. What we've done in terms of the cycleway program is deferred $750,000 off the cycleway from one year to the next. So you can see in the two columns there.
I'm not sure whether this is capital spend or the servicing costs of the capital spend.
It is the capital expenditure only.
So in fact, the actual so in 1819, where you're planning to spend 4,981, is that actual cash flow out that needs to be funded from rates, or is it $4,981 of borrowing, which would be the principal repayment and interest repayment of, in that year would be perhaps, I don't know, 12%?
It's neither of those. This is just the capital expenditure and doesn't take into considerations with the debt servicing or any other matters. It's only just to give an indication of the expenditure.
Yeah, okay, so that's clarified, but what I'm trying to get an understanding of, or ensure that everybody else understands if I don't, is that what we would have to rate for? No.
Carolyn. Is that working? Yeah. If I could assist there, that is the capital cost, and so the council could borrow for their share. What we don't know from this table, though, is the extent of any subsidy or co-investment from NZTA.
So that would be the maximum capital spend
Correct.
by council.
That we could.
The cost in any 1 year would be whatever the interest and dividend and principal repayment of that amount is.
Yes, on the DCC share of it.
Minus any NZTA co-investment.
Yeah.
So the approach that sort of says just to give an indication of capital expenditure, but the details around debt, etc., and also subsidies, also external revenue support, would become clearer through the next 3-year planning phase.
Councillor McTaggart.
I'm probably being really stupid, but it's not clear to me how this shows what the unfunded bit is from how this relates to our budgets. If you're moving things between budget lines, it makes it quite difficult for us to tell whether or not what the implication of that is. So I'm not sure that this actually relates to our budget lines, does it? If you've been moving things between years.
Yes, it does. It's the intention. It does. It relates to. Perhaps if I draw your attention to the report that we're talking about, there's the large A3 page, attachment 1, which is page 18, 15, 11. 11. So that table, upon which part of the report's based, sets out 3 options. The first option at the top is the current LTP. So that's the current dollars that are in there. The second option consolidates that budget lines, but also introduces the unfunded transportation projects, of which we just touched on before and are subject to the next report. Then option 3 is the difference, is an accelerated one where the general notion is that a large proportion of the central city improvement is undertaken subsequent to a period of 3 years planning and construction in years 4 to 7. So what then the table in the memo draws from is the difference essentially between table option 1 in terms of our paper renewals, and I'll use that line out as an example. At the moment that has from years 17-18 an annual amount of 856 for paver renewals, which is then accelerated in option 3. So it's
So could you take an example, like we've got on 1815-6, George Street including intersection streets, $2 million to $5 million. Where does that reappear and how does it turn into something in other pieces of paper? Just as a for example.
Yeah, just for example. So that's an unfunded project, and that would be reflected, if I can draw your attention to the large A3 one, in terms of, where are we, Central City Urban, no, sorry, the line that reads Transportation dash Central City with the asterisk there, would be in one of the years of 2018-19 through to 2021, which has $3 million per annum. So it would fall in one of those slots.
So it's converted itself from $2 to $5 million as a cost range to 3 lots of $3 million.
So that the row item in the table doesn't specify the nature of the projects.
Councillor McTavish.
So, what I'm seeking to understand is whether that bottom line in a memo, which you've just sent out, are you saying that in 15-16, if we wanted to complete the accelerated program, we would need to add in $350,000? In the 16-17 year, we could take out $350,000, so they net out effectively?
Yes, in that scenario, that's capital expenditure line only, doesn't take into consideration the revenue or other factors.
Yeah, right. So maybe for this, I'm just wondering, in terms of applying this, understanding the NZTA subsidy on those figures, or the co-investment component of that is going to be quite critical in determining the outcome in terms of what we put into budgets.
Yes, we will need to take a position on what that could possibly be. At this stage, there hasn't been a great deal of analysis on that. Certainly through the next course of the next 3 years, that would be worked through in a lot more detail.
No, I understand that, but for the purposes of a decision today, if what you're seeking is budget lines, then we probably need to understand how much of, for example, the year that Councillor Thompson was talking about, the $4,981,000, how much of that is urban design stuff, urban amenity, which would presumably not have an NZTA component, and how much of it is transportation work that might qualify for an NZTA subsidy, because that has an implication for our own debt requirements and subsequent costs.
Yes, significantly.
Any further questions, councillors?
I was just going to say that it's a little bit confusing because the urban amenity budget is included as a separate line, and that we're proposing no change to what's in the forward years at all. So that is not going to, that amount is already presuming there's no subsidy because we don't get a subsidy for that. So that's how that budget's been spread for that component. So the numbers, and I think partly that's why the numbers might be disjointed, is that in the one sense, when you estimate the project, it includes everything to do with that project. But in this larger spreadsheet, it's broken, that the urban amenity improvements is broken down based on that, how it's laid out in the LTP. Because, and that money is already in the forward profile.
For the urban amenity component of the Central City proposal, there is no proposed additional funding.
Correct.
So effectively, any additional Central City funding is covered in the unfunded transportation capital projects paper.
If I can just clarify that, it's correct what Anna said for the first 3 years of the LTP. If I can draw your attention to the memo again, in the row that refers to urban amenity funding, which is the second row down. Over the 10-year period there's no change, but there's a shift in money compared to, and that's what that row outlines, is the change in where the money falls compared to the pre-draft that you have in front of you.
Right.
Can I just ask another question for clarification? Because I'm really concerned about my understanding of this and everybody else's, and that is to understand the impact. And just if one, just for the sake of the argument, said there was no NZTA funding in any of this, then in 17-18, which is the first year, if you assume the first 2 years net out and it's negligible impact, in 17-18 you're talking about an additional capital requirement of 2324. The servicing costs on that is a conservative rough order of thumb are about 10% of that, roughly. But when you get to the next year and you say it's 10% of that, it's 10% of that plus the 10% of the year before. It's cumulative. So we just need to be careful that we don't look at that and say, oh, well, that's adding 500,000 in 1 year and 600 in the next. They add on to each other as you go along.
Councillor Wilson.
Just to make sure I'm reading this correctly, so if I look at the 1816-4, that page, which is 4 of 9 of the unfunded items, the second bottom row of numbers on the memorandum, no they don't, the first two are 250 and 400 from, are those numbers the same? Yeah, the total central city, those numbers reflect those numbers, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the only difference in the memo that's just been handed out compared to the table 2 in the report that you're referring to is that the tertiary precinct line is being excluded.
Yeah, okay. And so what we've already potentially done in the previous, because you didn't know we were going to do it, nor did we, is move the City to Harbour pedestrian bridge into a different time frame and potentially funded it as well, so that would go out. Yeah.
Yep, and that wouldn't change these numbers as well.
Okay. Can I just understand, because I'm feeling angsty that I don't understand, where does the subtotal unfunded excluding unfunded transportation capital, where do I find that line in one of these reports? Presumably that line, or is this because it's shifted around, there isn't another line?
Page 1816.4.
No, that's the unfunded transport. Yes. Going up another line, another row on the memo. I'm not quite sure where I find those figures.
They're not in the report we're currently talking about. So, but that is essentially the changes in timing of the paver renewals and urban amenity funding as a result of an accelerated program.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was hoping that was the answer. That's great.
Right. Well, we have memorandum, but we also, the primary document we have is the report. Would you like Jen to just go through right at the beginning, because I think there's been a fair bit of confusion around the table, so I think it would be helpful if you just briefly went over the relevance of the memo to the report, what it adds to it, what it clarifies in principle, and then we can interrogate the report, and then we can go on to it.
I guess all I'll say by introduction is the questions reflect the challenges of actually writing a report that takes a place-focused approach to projects and tries to look at all the different budget lines, particularly when you have transport and you have unknown subsidies and also different processes in play. So I hope we haven't created more confusion than we've than we intended to. But essentially, I think for the central city, the main reason that we've taken this approach is, I think you'd all agree, that it's important to look at what we're trying to achieve in a holistic way. The report touches on the central city plan and the importance of having a vision for the area and coordinating council's projects to achieve that vision. And some of those are capital and some of them are just renewal or general sort of operational budgets that are necessary to achieve that. So I think it's been a challenge to do, and I'm very appreciative of the staff that have been involved in trying to achieve that and work together in a collaborative way. And I think it's a good reflection of what can be done in terms of cross-departmental working together. So in terms of the urban design focused areas and what might be achieved, I would direct any questions to Glenn, and obviously from the transport budgetary questions, that's why Jean's here. But I think it reflects what council's said to date in terms of the vision for the central city that they would like to see, and continues the work that we've already begun in terms of implementing that vision in the warehouse precinct.
Just in terms of the three options that are on the spreadsheet, the first option really is just showing what is in the budget at the moment, and indicates that at the same time as that we do have some urban amenity funding out for the next 10 years, that we do have things like the water and waste and the pavers, which also need renewing. And that question comes about, well, if you're going to already dig up the road on George Street to replace the water main, should you also be doing that? So that's number one. Number two looks at, okay, you pull all of these things together and do all of that work at the same time, so that you're not digging up things one year and in the following year going back to paving, and then 5 years down the track deciding that you want to turn George Street into a shared space. So that's option two, is consolidating all of our renewals and our plans for how the central city would look in future. Option three basically says, rather than doing that over 10 years, you do it over a shorter time span. So rather than stretching it out so that we're going block by block and creating a longer term of disruption across the central city, is to speed it up and do it in a shorter time frame. And then the memo that Jean's tabled here was really just to show what is the difference between what is in the budget now and that accelerated option of speeding it up.
Any further questions back, Councillor?
I'm wondering, and perhaps this is one for you, Dr. Hazelton, that would you consider that a council view on this, whichever option, might be usefully consulted with in the way that we did the heritage input in the last annual plan? It's just that I think your comments then were really helpful in that the first option is not a goer for me anyway, because nothing irritates people more than the constant silly disruption and unproductive work. I don't know whether we could fund an accelerated option, but I'm wondering if we couldn't express a view about one or two or three and say to the punters in the consultation about the long-term plan, what do you think those are the options, and the way you just encapsulated, because it was asking you, because it was a very successful process in terms of the heritage contributions that are now in place. Would this fit the same sort of model, do you think?
I think it would. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but I think actually giving people that option of, okay, do you want to take a bit longer to do it and the rates impact will be less, but these will be the disadvantages of doing it, or would you like to get it over and done within a shorter space of time, but knowing that you're going to potentially be paying more rates? I think it's a valid thing to consult on.
Councillor McTavish.
Just further to that, I just wonder whether, and it's hard to tell from these budget lines, but how separatable different elements of the plan are. So, for example, if you think about it spatially, there's the tertiary precinct stuff, and then there's the serious core CBD stuff, as I understand it, and then there's sort of the warehouse precinct two-weighing stuff, which is more southern, and I don't know whether it is possible for us to think about it in geographic areas like that, or whether we can think about it more in components. So, for example, the two-weighing in the warehouse precinct, that to me feels like it could perhaps happen separately from the water main, George Street, Princess Street redevelopment and paving and amenity things. But I don't know, it's hard to tell from this report and from the budgets how easily we could tease out different elements should we not be able to afford the whole caboose at once.
This paper had its gestation originally in tender price for one block of George Street tendering, and it was hugely expensive, and we sat down and said this is going to be a better way. That gave rise to needing to do a 10-year program. What this report effectively is doing is saying there is a chunk of work we're going to need to sit down and do, or the council is going to need to sit down and do, if we're going to get best bang for our bucks and achieve the best outcome out there. The renewals funding lines is one funding element that you can then leverage off that to do other improvements. In terms of whether the bits are you can separate them, they probably can be, but certainly I think the guys, Glenn and about a comment, there is a view that as soon as you start talking about just the central city area, like George Street, Princess Street, the Octagon, you then start getting questions about the eastern bypass, the western bypass, the linkage with the warehouse and the university area, and it becomes bigger than Ben Hur. Part of what's being looked for here is trying to say, we need to do some work, or the council needs to do some work, I should say, around that investigation, and then looking for potentially putting some kind of placeholder in around 2018 and beyond that then says that's the sort of timing that the council is going to do quite a big chunk of work in that area and then work that program up.
In what area?
Or the central activity area, or the warehouse, or the university. That's still going to be worked through. It is, you don't want to underestimate the cost of doing the central city upgrade. Councillor Benson Pope, you may have been around last time it was done. As soon as we start talking about wholesale replacement of pavers, for example, down George Street, and replacement of water mains, you are talking about a 20-year life, 25-year life, effectively. And so part of this report's trying to say, consolidate a whole lot of things, the urban amenity, the various renewal lines, also taking account of the things like the bus hub and the change of bus routes, cycleways, and then having a bit of a master plan. I hesitate to use the word master plan, but an overall plan that then you can work through. But in some sense, if you're not going to put some kind of thinking now, next year we'll be back saying we need to do some thinking and we need to think about when we're going to construct.
I'm not advocating that we don't do thinking now. I'm simply trying to understand if there are alternative ways to cut the pie effectively, because at the moment it seems to have been cut in terms of kind of putting everything in a basket and trying to work out how different elements fit. And what I'm saying is it possible for us to think more about it in terms of a geographic progression?
I think quite possibly, but you need to have some kind of idea of what the total cost is and how you might spread that. One of the drivers, I think, will be in terms of the state of the water mains down the main street. They are very old at the moment, they're hanging together, but I think it's 100 years old, and time and time they'll be able to tell you that. That's a significant risk to us. And so, in the state of the pavers, you'll recall a number of discussions around Infrastructure Services Committee items about the state of the pavers and the need to replace those. Those are two things that are becoming more urgent and then drive, I suppose, a bit of a focus, and the other things hang off that. But there are various reasons to maybe do the warehouse separately and other things.
Are you saying? Are you saying? Can you see the budget effectively with George Street in the town centre speeded up, but Vogel Street later to try and balance that budget across the years? Is that what you're suggesting we can look at? Because we could.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking things like the two-waying of Crawford Street. I don't know how connected the budgets are for the two-waying of Crawford Street and the repaving and water main work on George and Princess Street. And if they could be disentangled, from my perspective, if I could disentangle them, I might be able to see how, in a budgetary sense, we might be able to spread them better.
Sorry, I think one of the other key points about why they've been put together is that with NZTA's new business case process, they want to see it as a cohesive whole, which is why we've had to put it together like that rather than putting them up as separate projects, because their natural questions will be, well, if you're doing this, what is the effect on this bit here? So that was the first point. In terms of the staging thing, it's probably a bit easier with the renewals and the urban amenity funding to do that, but then you're losing the opportunity of the transportation changes, because we won't have, say for example, George Street part, or the Octagon, dare I say it, part of it being shared space. We couldn't afford to do that with just the urban amenity budget. All we'd be doing with the urban amenity budget would be redressing and some slight improvements, because you'd have the renewals money and some money for improvement. If you're wanting to make more substantial changes, that's where we're going to need the transportation money to be part of it, because otherwise we just won't be able to do that under existing budgets for renewals or for urban amenity upgrades. So that's why we're trying to align all of those things together, but I do know that it makes it really difficult because you start getting some very big numbers and thinking about how can we spread that best.
Councillor Benson.
Thank you. Some of you were here yesterday and you would have heard me refer to contributions from property owners that were extracted during the original work that was done with the current configuration of George Street. Has that idea been considered, some sort of charge by way of targeted rate or by way of a cost per linear metre of shop frontage for those who are most immediately affected, advantaged by such change?
We haven't got anywhere close to even considering that. At the moment, we have a couple of renewal lines in an urban amenity budget which are separate and distinct for individual projects. What we're trying to do is say that what we need to do is a more consolidated view, and what we're talking about is developing a program that pulls all those things together and then comes back and looks at how it might be funded. There's clearly going to be an element of NZTA funding for some elements. There will be an element of potential benefits to the urban landscape or streetscape, and the council might decide that there is appropriate to have a targeted rate. We haven't even got close to that. Part of it's at the moment we don't have the consolidated budgets or the program thinking. And going back to Councillor McTavish's questions, those are all things that need to be looked at, and I suppose in an organisational sense it's saying, is there a program that you want us to look into which pulls all those things together, and then how do we properly structure that program? At the moment there is no funding identified, and so one option is to still have no funding for 2018, but we work towards that and we come back next year and say here's a more worked up plan. I suppose the staff and what this report reflects is it is pulling together a number of different budget lines and an overall council approach that's needed, not an individual departmental budget line approach.
Okay. Councillor Cowell.
I'm liking the idea of probably geographical splits in these approaches. The total amount of money involved, if we said, yeah, let's have that in our aspiration or put it out, is more than the amount that people are wanting for the Mosgiel Pool and the South Dunedin, whatever it is. From our point of view, and from the ratepayers' point of view there, we're comparing not just transportation related things or these area things, but everything else that goes into our budget. So it seems to me very likely that somebody who's very positive about investing more in Vogel Street precinct might feel very lukewarm about one of the other parts of this, and they're not really connected apart from that they come under one general department and that they have some NZTA overlap. But in normal people's minds, they're not necessarily connected, and we could well want all of one and none of another. And the geographical fitting in together things seem to me that they do have some synergies, but the others are just, as it happens, you're a collection of people who are responding to all of them. But perhaps I'm trying to reinforce what I think was partly Councillor McTavish's. Yeah. Anyway, could we have them in geographical areas so as that when we consult, we can say, what do you think about different things, which will be compared with other big funded projects, because these are big funded.
Just one thing to note that the report says is in terms of options, there's innumerable options that could be put together, because some components of every project are need to do, because the water main needs to be replaced or the pavers need to be replaced, and some could be varying levels of nice to do, of upgrades past that point. And then they can also, there's the time factor of in which order they get done. And so I think to trying to write the report, and the options that Glenn highlighted are sort of indicative options, but for any particular geographical area you could change the, where you are in the scale of must do to nice to do, the timing, and its, relationship with the things around it. So I guess what's difficult is you need to kind of get a sense of both for each area what you'd like to have as an outcome, and then the priority and then try to put all the pieces back together.
Have we got some unfunded must-do things in here?
Yeah, the renewals, the paver renewals and the water main renewals they are funded, but the upgrades that may be tied to them are part of the timing decisions, and that's what Glenn was saying, that it's more advantageous to do the upgrade when you're doing the renewals, so that's why you link the two together, but you can disaggregate them. Yeah.
And while it's true to say that the renewals are funded according to their plan, they're funded over a 10 to 15 year period, and they are funded then on a sort of block by part block, and only to replace the mains and the paver blocks within the current curb line. So you've got a potentially, if you only take that, you've got a very long period where you only replace what you've currently got and there's no other improvements. It doesn't take account of the bus hub and the rerouting of the buses as a result of that, the cycleway, the safety improvements, the amenity. So that's sort of the reason for having I suppose, a program and working up that. And it is, as Anna started, a place-based approach. You take a look at the overall environment, say here's what you want to do, and then you figure out how you do that using a mix of existing funding and potentially additional funding.
Does this have the bus hub in it somewhere?
Yes, it does. There's certainly the more detail of the transport stuff is in the next report.
Where is the bus hub?
Councillor Hawkins.
The bus hub's, sorry, I just had a question about the bus hub. It's in the table.
It's November 19th.
No, I think the question was, where is it geographically, where is it in the report? Yes.
Where is it proposed to be, as opposed to?
The decision hasn't been made.
Thank you.
So it's in the same place as the car parking building.
Now we know where that is.
But just to know, in terms of the question around geography, if you do look at the table on 18, 15, 11, you will see that there is broadly based around geographic areas of the city. So there's no transport spending in the warehouse precinct for the next couple of years. We'll continue with our amenity project down there. But then you look at goes George Street Octagon, then moves down into Princess Street, the Exchange, and then onto areas like Great King Street after that. So there are some geographic bases around where we've put things as it is. It's not just we'll go from this part of the city to the other. There is trying to be a logical sequence here, but also depending on where we thought the greatest amount of transportation changes might come. So, George Street, the Octagon, Princess Street are probably where most of the transportation changes will be, which is why they're programmed out a little bit further.
Thanks. Without wanting to preempt the collective community view, it is possible through the central city work that we collectively may decide to do something different to the status quo in, hypothetically speaking, the Octagon, involving hypothetically moving the cruise ship shuttles and craft market to somewhere else, hypothetically say the railway station. Now, that may require some capital works to make it work at the other end of that shift, and I wonder whether that would be, and there's obviously no project.
It's hypothetical.
Because it's hypothetical.
No hypothetical budget
Were it to be considered essentially a mitigation of the Octagon project, is that something that would fit in there? Or is that something that or is it something that we would have to do somewhere else?
It would be preferable that that was part of the next 3 years planning phase, so that when it came to what we had shored up around this is what the Octagon is going to look like, then we'd make all of those changes at that time. So you'd get a budget for the Octagon that's locked down in terms of, yes, we're going to move this out of here and we're going to put this in here, so that you have that's what the planning the next 3 years period is for. We're not saying that these costs, are down to a T for any of those projects, because we don't know what people's aspirations for the Octagon or for George Street exactly are yet. That's why there's like a range of costs in the other table.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with it as long as it's not excluded by the way this is laid out. That's fine. Thanks.
Councillor Staines.
I think Councillor Benson Pope has already indicated that he's happy to move something. So I will just make the comment, Eureka, I've got it. And B, hurrah, we're thinking strategically across all the departments of council when it comes to dealing with our central city, which is the economic driver. And it's taken me a long time to get that, and that isn't a question, but I think it's fine.
Where's the money coming from?
I want to ask, what is driving the order of this? And God forbid I do not want another Portobello Road here, each block owner coming along to us and saying we want that to be first. My presumption here that what is driving it is good engineering and common sense, that we're going to do the big pipes that need to be put at the right end first and not compromise the small pipes at the other end by doing that. And those sort of, there's going to be infrastructure common sense that drives the order, and the things underground that will then make the opportunity of doing some really neat stuff above ground at a much cheaper rate. At a cheaper rate than would be done retrospectively a little later. That's how this is working, isn't it? So, yeah, which I am thrilled, because I am sick of hearing of stories of people coming back later, and even on Portsmouth Drive maybe, tar sealing a coat over after we've taken out the poles rather than before, and things like that. So I think this sounds really neat. I think that the reports possibly undersell the savings that are in there, but by doing all of this in a coordinated manner, and that is the story that I think is the untold story in these reports. But also taking, so I just want to understand that there are considerable savings in doing it in this model.
If we use the Portobello Road safety improvements acceleration by way of example, there's efficiency gain.
Portsmouth Drive, I mean, is where you said earlier that you might need to go and tar seal afterwards after you've taken the posts out. If we'd taken the posts out before we even did any sealing on Portsmouth Drive, it would have been really the best time frame.
I'm not sure your question, sorry.
I was just relating it to that one. But what I mean is there are savings in doing it all together.
Yes, there is. We would expect that. But what we don't know is what those savings will be at this stage.
No, but yeah, and that's a bit that I think is undersold in this report, and that we don't quite understand the process.
You might get an answer behind.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'd just like to point from a Three Waters perspective, one of our major costs of any project is refurbishment. So if we tie up with the Century City Works, we basically lose our refurbishment costs, but we share our savings with the transportation cost of refurbishing it. So, yeah.
Right.
Councillor Thompson.
Still asking questions or
We're
keeping out of the bath shouting.
We're still in question.
Okay, well, I have some questions, and the first, they're rhetorical questions. Nothing in standing orders that you can ask rhetorical questions.
Just ask them yourself.
Put some order that you've got to worry about.
No, but Councillor McTavish asked what I think is a particularly important question, which is
Probably inadvertently.
possibly, and that is, it's really hard in this forum to get a sense for, well, what links with what becomes essential if you commit to that, otherwise you've lost the advantage, what can be postponed, that kind of thing. And so what I've chosen to do is to look at this as we review the LTP again every 3 years. And so the critical period for me is this first 3 years. And if I look at the first 3 years, my rhetorical question is, am I correct? The first 3 years, if you look at the things that are not planning, and you can do the planning now, you don't have to action it, you've done it, it's there, you don't have to do it again if you put something back a year. But the only thing in those 3 years that differentiates these three tables is the Eastern Freight Bypass. If you ignore, and the fact that the pavers in one start a year later than they do in the other. Correct?
That is correct. And just the reason for doing the Eastern Bypass first is because it's a key thing to get an understanding of what you do there, and it has a big impact on potentially the central city network.
What you're signalling is a different way of thinking around planning, which, as various people have said, makes enormous sense because over the long term you take significant cost out. But would it be reasonable to say that in the first 3 years, if we adopt that difference in thinking, we are probably at most putting in an additional $2,100,000 of capital spend, and it's in the third of those 3 years. So what we're committing to before we do the next LTP is actually the time to think about some of those things. The phasing might be able to be tweaked if we got to if it's very clear that we've got a significant cash flow issue. We've got time over that 3 years to rethink that. So I guess I'm really asking, can we think about it like that? Can we think about it in terms of let's do the planning in this 3 year periods that's needed to make this possible if we can do it. Let's recognise that we do have some additional costs whichever one of these three we adopt, and so we could adopt number 3, and we wouldn't do anything in number 3 that would be wasted if come the review and we had to slow some stuff down and go back to 2.
That's what we're essentially proposing here. You can choose whether you do an accelerated or not as well. That's essentially what we've done in terms of the timing of the big chunks, is that would all, planning's done this next 3 years, but the big decisions are subject to the next LTP round, plus decision making that will happen between now and then as well. So the big decisions are much later on in terms of the next LTP, whether you might decide to stick with something that's similar to there, or something that's perhaps a little bit slower to fit with the headroom and availability, etc.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor McTavish.
I don't think I've asked enough questions, Your Worship.
Right, that's fine. Councillor Bezet, you had a question? No.
I believe Councillor Benson Pope's got something to move us on.
Oh, that's right. Councillor Peake.
Yeah, thank you. I'm getting a glimmer of some reality now to about what all this meant, much more than I had before. And I just think, in terms of where Councillor Thompson's coming from, I mean, I'm more relaxed about it. I'd just be interested to know from you whether you put the accelerated in there because you thought that was the one that would work best for the integration of all of these projects, and the one that you would support over the other two. I have another question after that.
First, I'll just go back and go that quoting Councillor Staines, that the Councillor Thompson's was the eureka moment, that he's understood exactly what we were trying to do with the report, that it was very much the next 3 years is planning, but we need to have some confidence that after those 3 years that there will be some type of commitment to funding whichever model it is. In terms of the accelerated, that was suggested that we include it. It wasn't whether it's a favoured option or not. It was more around it should be an option that's put on the table, because otherwise when you do look at it, you think it could be 10 years that will have disruption throughout the entire central city, at different parts at different times. But certainly, that's a question that I think the public needs to think about, is do they, and the council, do you want the central city looking unfinished for 10 years?
Thank you. And just one more teetering tantalisingly off the end of the 10 years is a column headed Harbour Basin. Just wondering what you had in mind for that. What did you put that there?
And which one? Sorry, what was the
Harbour Basin?
Harbour Basin. Oh, so that's the crossing that Councillor Wilson referred to previously. So you'd have the bridge crossing across there, and then some work around that amenity in that area. There was a plan done a few years ago as part of the original Central City plan, which basically extended that area around where Custom House is now, and made it so that it was more feasible to actually get in and out of the water there as well. And so there is a pre-existing design, but that's some years old now.
Thank you.
Councillor Cole.
Following on from Councillor Thompson's note about year 3, and that there'll be another long-term plan talked about then, and that these things aren't set in concrete, they're giving a steer to both the staff and our ratepayers as to where we're going over the 10 years, but they're not committed to. It's very useful to have them. The option 1, current LTP budget, is of course one of those. This is the end of 3 years from the last one. So the Central City Cycle Network, for instance, at 1.7 million is equally something that was planned then, and we could be thinking about again at the end of these 3 years, as is the 2.1 for the freight bypass. So both of those are equally. The fact that they happen to be in the budget or happen to not be in the budget doesn't make them committed to any more or less than each other, does it? Am I? Yes.
So I'm just going to refer to the report first. Yes, so you're correct to a certain extent. So whilst using the cycleways, but we know that there's money of approximately $1 million a year. While that's in the first 3 years, there's probably from our perspective a little bit more certainty around that. Anything beyond the year 4 is less certain as such. If that's your question.
Yes. So the same time as the freight bypass might kick in under this proposal, we could equally, for example, say we're doing the freight bypass 2.1 spread it over 2 years, and equally the cycle network of 1.7 could be spread over a period, so that neither of them have any more or less, we don't have any more or less commitment to them, or that we're not obliged to do one more than the other. It just happens that one is in the previous long-term budget and it happens that the other isn't. Is that the...
Yes, that's right.
Can I just ask, finally, the questions? It's been articulated by Councillor Thompson, the first 3 years is pretty much planning. To what extent is that also consensus building and consultation? Because my concern, particularly in the central city area, which as some other councillors said, is the most important area here. It is the most crucial in terms of what we do, it's the most crucial in terms of the impact it has on our town, and it's the most crucial if we get it wrong. And I think that it's extremely important that we get a consensus among all the stakeholders, particularly say the retailers, to whom it's most important, and their customers and their owners, but also that we don't end up in a situation where we choose the lowest common denominator because we can't find consensus on the best thing. So to what extent do you see this as building that consensus and building that aspiration and vision as much as planning the pragmatics?
Yeah, absolutely, I think that's so, and this is something that I think I raised when we had the report on the lower Octagon a couple of months ago, that it is that time when you start going through the process, like for example we went through with the warehouse precinct, and we've just recently started with Princess Street. It's that very much you start off with the maps, you get people to buy into this is what they want the area to look like, and then they also start seeing some of the compromises that have to be made because different parts of the community want different things, and you do start moving along that route to a more consensual approach. And I think it took a while to get there, probably a little bit longer than we'd hoped with the warehouse precinct, because I think we ended up with the physical works about 8 or 9 months later than we'd hoped. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we've got that work done and there's been very little negative feedback about it, and I'd hope that that is a model that would be pushing out across the central city to incorporate people's views in very early, get them thinking about what that vision is, so that at the end of that 3-year period that we've gone through, that it's not a surprise suddenly that we're doing something with the Octagon, that we're doing something with George Street, that it's very much people have come along on the journey, and the plans that we've got at the end of the day are the best we possibly can have.
Thank you. Right. In a moment I'm going to break for afternoon tea. Councillor Vincent Pope, you have a motion to put, so can I suggest you put it and then we'll break?
That's fine. I'll speak to it. Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to move the recommendations and also an extra one, which is that for the purpose of consultation, that Council expresses preference for the option 3, the consolidated, accelerated approach, but we consult on 2 and 3. And first of all, I want to...
That's right, carry on.
First of all, I want to congratulate the transportation planning staff in particular in the first instance for jumping through the hoops, or forcing elected members and others to jump through the hoops of the new process that NZTA has decided it wanted to have in terms of the new business case process, because that's been quite an extensive process in itself, and in many ways it seems to me that's what's driven the consolidation that we're seeing here, that's making some of this less specific than we'd probably desire and a bit more obtuse in some ways. And also, in terms of the matter you raised, Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Mayor, the capacity that we have in our staff sitting at the table there has already been demonstrated in terms of successful consultation processes, and I don't really want to say any more about that because I think we're very well served. This is a 10-year plan, and probably another 10-year plan clearly as well. And so it's always going to be unspecific as to what does actually happen when. But I think we all know that there is work necessary on the campus because the strength of the university to the city and the importance of that institution, of all the institutions in the area, is without a doubt, and we do need to attend to some work in terms of safety and other urban amenity in that area. We know that George Street and the Octagon and Princess Street need attention of various kinds. I'm less precious about some of the paving issues than I was previously because of the maintenance work that's been done. and I think a lot of that work with appropriate maintenance and attention will hang on for some time yet. So the specifics, I think, will always be driven by opportunity. If a water main fails, well, we know we're going to have to do something. If it creates a hole in the road, we'll know we have to do something fast. And funnily enough, of course, the paving that's in place in George Street at the moment happened for exactly that reason, because of the need to separate the combined sewage from all those shops. And it was only when that had to be done to stop the surcharging into the harbour that the pavements were being dug up, and the council of the day decided to do what you see now. So there's a symmetry there that is interesting. Clearly a lot of our urban structure, infrastructure needs attention, whether it's the invisible stuff or the cosmetic things that are not just cosmetic in the sense of their importance, because this is, as you said and as Councillor Staines and others have highlighted, this is the first impression people have, whether they're visitors, residents, cruise ship visitors, whatever, of our central city. And if we really wish to keep up with others and get ahead of them, we were ahead once when this work was originally done, and we've slipped behind for all sorts of historical reasons. We need to do this work. When exactly, I don't know. In what order, I don't know. How we fund it, well, we'll see, won't we? We won't be able to fund all of it, but I think it's essential that this work is included in the plan for consultation, and that we get good feedback from the community about what they want done, that they have an idea of what our preference is. And as I say, my preference is, and I think I hope Council's preference will be for an accelerated version because of the length of disruption issue that's been mentioned. I hope everyone enjoys their afternoon too.
We will be back here at 20 to 4. An afternoon tea break now. Councillor Cowan.
I approve of them not being in the tertiary precinct thing, essentially on the basis that it's another group that I understand has got opinions and things, and we get in some of our reports from time to time that the tertiary precinct steering group, or whatever it is, has an opinion or is in support of, or whatever else. We haven't been paid the respect of having any reports back from them. We have no idea. Some of our councillors do have some idea, and we do hear from time to time thoughts they might be having, but I feel very uncomfortable about voting for anything in the tertiary precinct without any feedback we're getting from any of our input into it, and that we should actually be having some proper reports and things back. I've been asking for them for a while, there just doesn't seem to be anything. So having it as unfunded or outside seems to me a good plan until anybody can be bothered getting back to us about what people actually think and what's going on, and particularly that tertiary group.
Further speakers? All right. Councillor McTavish, or Councillor Peake, do you wish to speak to that? Councillor McTavish, do you wish to exercise your right to reply?
I think the point that Councillor Wilson makes, if there are indications of external funding which might help this project, either of these projects actually, but particularly the tertiary precinct upgrade, feel like an achievable outcome within the term of the 10-year plan, then I think that that's exactly the sort of feedback that would be helpful during the submission phase, and something that we can then take into account. And I have no doubt that the University and the Polytech will avail themselves of the opportunity as they have in the past.
Thank you. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
No. Recorded, please.
Tremendous report. Thank you. It's carried. Okay.
There was a cover of... Oh.
Sorry?
Well, Jane's got to stand up.
Just got a question, really. Just want to make sure that the linkage between the last report's resolution and this one is appropriate, because I don't believe in the previous one that we actually formally said that those projects would be put into the LTP as for consideration and for us to then take that forward. They were Can we just go back to
I
that?
think that's okay, Jean. We'll put them in. They're all
Yeah.
coming back here on the 2nd anyway, modelling out to show the rates implications. So that'll be the date that the council make a decision about whether they want to put them in the draft or not today. So I think we're all clear. The message is for Grant to include them in his modelling.
Just on that, I'm assuming though that that Jean's memo is the basis for that in terms of what's coming back. That's understood. We'll work that through and make sure it's clear, but that's the basis for it. Yep. For the last report, the memo that Jean sent out, which summarised the funding.
Yes. Option 3.
Option 3.
Option 3, yes.
Which is the new basis.
Okay, so the remaining...
There was a cover-all for transport, which, for people's information, the Regional Land Transport Committee is meeting on Monday in Gore. At that, we expect the Regional Land Transport Plan to be agreed to go out for submission. That will happen relatively quickly, and the process is that we need to put a submission in from Council supporting these, what's happened here today, albeit I appreciate no final decision will be made, but we need to be able to, subject to other refining of those resolutions, this may be the best time, because I will not be here on Monday otherwise, that the Council authorise staff to make a submission on the draft regional land transport consistent with the decisions that are made by the Council at these long-term plan meetings in relation to the 10-year transportation programme, which allows the Council staff to start on that process after Monday, because there is a fairly tight frame. It will be consistent not only with the meetings today and tomorrow, but also the February the 2nd meeting. But it means that we don't have to come back to Council for a special meeting just to get permission of Council.
So is there a seconder for that? Councillor McTavish. Okay, is there any discussion on that? If not, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Okay, thank you. The two remaining lines on the roading and footpaths section are parking enforcement, which is page 11/11. We'll go to that first. Adrian, you're front of this one.
Oh, I thought we were doing community development. I thought we were doing city planning. Oh, okay.
Today. Well, yeah, we've finished this section.
Speak quick.
Okay. So, councillors, we'll pick straight off with page 11/11 in the big folder. Parking enforcement, budgets are there. Any questions? Councillor Carroll.
This just refers back to previous things. Can we have in here any indication that there might be reduced parking revenue as a result of the one-way street cycleways?
Oh no, I was going to ask. What happens if people develop car parks? Can we factor that in? And can we factor in that the petrol price goes up and people start getting buses? I mean, how do we know which of those?
Talking about operating parking revenue.
Yep. Risk.
Sorry, this is parking enforcement, not City Park, which is the next activity.
But I'll be prepared to answer that question.
I'll hold that for next.
So that's what we pointed out. So, any further questions on this one?
Just noting on page 11:15, I've marked residence parking permit, which I know for some people exceedingly important. That's going up, I think, for greater than 3%. How does that, or have I done my maths incorrectly, which could be possible?
And no, the parking fees are not increasing.
The residence parking permit
$16.
is went up last year.
went up in 14.
Oh, sorry, that's last year's. I'm looking at the wrong line. Apologies. Thank you.
Any other questions? Nothing's going up, so there's not much to ask about.
Is this the area, and I'm just going to upset Neil Collins, is this the area that we actually do put out there for that debate, and I mentioned I'm going to be shot down, so that's okay, the free parking permits? Is this free parking permits in this area? Over 75s?
Would you like to move something, Councillor Wilson?
I think there is a debate to be had as to why we do that. I wasn't on council.
Can I suggest, Councillor Wilson, with respect, that this is questions. If you want to indicate that you want to move something, please do so, and when we get to the end of questions, we'll do that.
Sorry, I'm going to ask a question. Is it? Do you understand the justifications of the over 75 free permits, and is it still valid to be doing that with constricted and competing demands for parking?
I'm afraid I can't answer that, Councillor Wilson.
It's coming from a Mosgiel Tory ward councillor, I might note.
Very old one up there. my in-laws love it, don't get me wrong, but I do wonder if it is time to understand, because I wasn't on council when it was done, and I'm just wondering if it's still valid and is it consistent with all of our strategies? A report. If they can't answer it, then I will ask for a report. Yes, it is.
We can look into that. But unless you want to move something now, we'll move on to...
That's fine, I've asked the questions that inform me.
On the grounds that 80 is the new 60 or something like that. Should be fine. Right, if that's, if parking enforcement, if everyone's done with that, we'll move on to City Park, which is 11.21. And I take it Councillor Calverton wants to raise that issue again.
Yes.
So the question...
I'd like to see in the projected out 10 years revenue some projected idea of where we expect parking revenue to be, bearing in mind that we might lose, at a worst case scenario, 350,000 or something a year, and in a best case scenario, clearly nothing, but somewhere in there. I'd like to see it acknowledged. Is there a way we could put that in there? Because otherwise it's not including something which we know to be a likelihood that we will lose income from.
So at this stage the budget has been prepared on the status quo basis, no changing for the number of car parks. If there was a significant change in the car parking structure, it is likely that we'd have to push car parks further out into the Dunedin environment. So at this stage we've just had a flat one effectively for the income.
So at this point it's not modelled, and there's a risk there, but until that's modelled out we can't just put arbitrary figures in. Before anything is done though, there will be ample time to come back and reflect the budgetary change.
Could we have it noted that it hasn't been addressed?
Yes, we could put it as a risk in the assumptions document. Can you do that, Jane?
Further questions? This is 11.21 to 11.27.
Councillor Thompson asked a question about that spreadsheet yesterday, 11.22, in terms of the car park buildings. Was there an answer to that?
Sorry?
No, I haven't had an answer. But I was asking the wrong person at the time, as it transpired.
So what was the question?
My question was, we appear to, our car park buildings run at an annual loss, and I wondered whether that was a policy-driven direction or whether this is the way it is.
Unfortunately, it's just the way that it is.
This is slightly
perverse.
Perverse, yes, that we would run them at a 50, especially when it costs less to park in a car park building than it does to park on the street.
Yeah, ironically, we are putting the rate up from $2 to, or proposing to put the rate up from $2 to $2.50, which is still lower than other car parks around town, like the Meridian Mall car parks at $3, and so is the Wilson's one beside Farmers as well. So,
sorry, can I ask about that then? So these are the car parks that we operate?
these are the ones that we operate. So the Great King Street one, it's the lower Murray Place, and the Wall Street one.
So we no longer have any parking buildings that we've leased to anyone else?
So Wilson's lease the Upper Murray Place.
Murray Place, that's the only one?
Yes. That I'm aware of, yeah.
What about Lower Murray Place?
No, that's ours. So it's the one beside the Regent Theatre? Yeah.
So the answer is they run at a loss?
Yes.
That's not the answer, actually. The answer is to give them the Wilsons.
We're lucky Wilsons are prepared to take some of it.
So I guess you need to look at the context that you've got there, though, is because they are rented from city property, who then make a surplus on them. So when you're looking at the returns from the two entities, you then need to look at what the return is overall. It's not necessarily the way I would set it up.
Can we ask for a review of how that is set up? Because with all respect, what property charge sometimes and the unintended consequences in other departments' budgets is actually really important, that it's fair and equitable. So as part of that, can we have a paper at some stage? I don't think it's going to be rocket science to it, to review how those costings come through.
Yes.
Thank you.
Further question, Councillor Peck.
Thank you. Graham, I just wondered if you would just one thing that there seemed to be an anomaly in terms of the charging. It seems a low on the low side, and I'm looking at 1125 at the halfway down at the off-street car parks, the flat rate, the flat fee per day, and St Andrew Street's always puzzled me as to why it could be half the price of a bus fare from Portobello. Park there all day, and I'm just wondering why it's not consistent with the railway station.
Generally, because that, one of the reasons for that is the fact that the car park is of a low standard. It is actually only a gravel car park, and it's a significant walk from the central business district. And as we know in Dunedin, if you can't get in, park straight outside your shop, there's normally an issue. So it is but I guess the key thing here is that we can actually review that. I'm more than willing to review it and put it up.
I thought is in the railway.
So it's the one diagonally opposite where the farmers market is. It's that strip along the back there.
I'm just wondering if that's not unsealed as well, though, isn't it? The one we're charging $5 a day for railway north, I guess. They're beside the market.
One of them tends to be long-term lease, which you tend to pay a bit of a premium for because you have certainty of a car park. These effectively hunting for a park.
I just mention this because of the cost of bus fares and,
yes,
and how appealing it is to park fairly close to the city. If you work anywhere around George Street and St Andrew Street, it would be a super deal.
I would like councillors to note, in particular Councillor Davis, that this cost centre or activity, we've actually reduced staffing, so we are down one full staff member. So,
any further questions? Councillor White.
Looking through some of the city upgrades, etc., that we've discussed earlier, we talk about pay and display machines. Is there any other thoughts of other technology for car parking, like for example car park scanners, where you park it like Palmerston North has got?
Not at this stage, and they haven't been allowed in the budget. It'd be fair to say what we're trying to do at the moment is actually get the current equipment up to the suitable standard. There has been a bit of deferred maintenance in this area, which we're trying to address currently.
But as we are doing the town centre upgrade, those things will all come in for a look at some point in time, because some of them are considerably more visually appealing than what we have now.
Right, there are no further questions. Jane, I take it that the recommendations on page 5 are the ones that I now need to... So I'll move for the chair recommendations 1 to 4, seconded Councillor Staines. Any discussion on those? You'll see them on the page immediately. That's page 5 of the decision sheet that was handed out this morning. And they're the standard required, statutorily required, I think, for the consultation one. I've moved it, seconded, no discussion. I'll put it all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.